The softest summer breeze carries the scent of pine and warm earth, entirely oblivious to the history waiting just beyond the horizon. The sun has just slipped below the edge of the world, pulling a deep, velvet blanket of twilight over the endless, rolling fields. It is a Saturday evening, the 21st of June. For now, it is just a summer night, like so many that have come before it. The heat of the day lingers in the soil, rising up to meet the cool, damp air settling over the meadows. The world is bathed in a soft, blue dusk. Along the quiet country roads, the dust kicked up by farmers returning from the fields has finally begun to settle, drifting down to coat the wild grasses in a fine, pale powder. If you were to stand there, at the edge of the deep woods or near the banks of the slow-moving rivers, you would hear only the timeless symphony of the earth. The gentle, rhythmic chirping of crickets. The sudden, brief rustle of a bird shifting in the high branches. The soft, liquid murmur of water lapping against muddy shores. It is a peaceful sound. A sound that invites you to close your eyes, to breathe in the rich, heavy scent of damp leaves and wildflowers, and to simply be still. In a small wooden guardhouse, illuminated by the dim, golden glow of a single kerosene lamp, a young man sits at a rough-hewn table. He is tired, his shoulders slouched beneath his tunic, but his face is soft in the yellow light. He is dipping a pen into a small glass well of ink, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. He is writing a letter home. He does not write about empires, or borders, or the grand, sweeping movements of the world. He writes about the things that matter. He tells his mother that his boots are holding up well. He asks if the cherry trees in their small garden have begun to bear fruit yet. He mentions, with a shy sort of pride, that he has learned how to mend his own socks, though he admits they are not as neat as hers. He signs his name, folds the paper carefully, and tucks it into an envelope. As he seals it, he imagines the long train ride this small piece of paper will take, traveling hundreds of miles back to the quiet kitchen table he knows so perfectly. He imagines his mother reading it in the morning light. In this quiet moment, his heart is not on a border, it is sitting by the hearth of his childhood home. This young man is not alone in his longing. All along this invisible line drawn across the earth, thousands of boys and men are wrapped in the quiet cocoon of the night, left entirely alone with their private thoughts. Some are sitting on the steps of their barracks, sharing a cigarette, watching the glowing cherry of the tobacco flare and fade like a tiny, breathing star. They speak in hushed murmurs, their voices barely carrying over the whispering grass. They talk about the girls they danced with last autumn, the trades they plan to take up when they finally return home, the simple, beautiful dreams of ordinary lives. Just a short distance away, across the dark, reflective ribbon of the river, the shadows of the ancient forest are thick and impenetrable. Beneath the sprawling canopy of oak and pine, another young man is awake. The air is warm and heavy, clinging to his skin. He leans against the rough bark of a tree, looking up through the branches at the scatter of pale stars. He reaches a hand into the breast pocket of his uniform and traces the edges of a worn photograph. It is too dark to see her face clearly, but he doesn't need to. He knows every line of her smile, every curve of her cheek. He closes his eyes and listens to the wind sighing through the pine needles, pretending, just for a moment, that it is the sound of the ocean they promised to visit one day. These two young men, separated by a river and the colors of their coats, are breathing the exact same night air. They are looking at the exact same stars. They are holding onto the exact same fragile, human hopes. They are both afraid of the dark, and they both just want to go home. Further inland, away from the quiet watchfulness of the border, the villages and towns are fast asleep. The windows of the wooden houses are propped open to catch the evening breeze, letting in the sweet smell of blooming linden trees. Inside, the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of sleeping families fills the darkened rooms. In one house, a mother gently pulls a thin cotton sheet over her sleeping child, brushing a damp curl of hair from his forehead. She lingers for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, feeling that profound, quiet ache of love that only a parent knows in the still of the night. In another house down the street, an old clock ticks patiently in the hallway, counting out the seconds of a world at peace. Down in the village square, the baker is already awake. The warmth of the oven spills out into the cool street. His hands, dusted with white flour, move rhythmically as he kneads the heavy dough. It is a gentle, comforting labor. He is preparing the bread for the morning, trusting entirely that the town will wake up hungry, that the sun will rise, that the children will run down the cobblestones to buy warm loaves just as they did yesterday, and the day before that. He hums a soft, old folk tune under his breath, a melody passed down through generations, filling the small bakery with a sense of enduring, unbreakable normalcy. The night wears on, deepening into the quietest, most solitary hours. The hours where the world seems to hold its breath. The mist rises thicker from the riverbanks, weaving like pale ghosts through the trunks of the trees. The dew settles heavy and cold on the blades of grass, turning the meadows into a sea of tiny, glittering diamonds under the starlight. For the men standing watch, the tiredness settles deep into their bones. They stamp their feet softly to keep the blood moving. They pull their collars up against the creeping dampness of the midnight air. They stare out into the darkness, their eyes playing tricks on them, turning bushes into shadows and shadows into nothing at all. But there is nothing to fear tonight. The world is asleep. It is just the wind, and the water, and the quiet earth. There is a strange, delicate beauty in this ignorance. In this final, fleeting pocket of time, no one knows what tomorrow will bring. The letters have been written. The photographs have been kissed. The dough has been left to rise. Everyone is still whole. Everyone is still dreaming of a future that looks exactly like the past. As the hours drift slowly toward dawn, the deep, ink blue of the night sky begins, ever so softly, to thin. The horizon, far away to the east, takes on the palest shade of gray. It is the gentlest of transitions. The stars begin to fade, one by one, surrendering quietly to the approaching day. In the branches above, a single bird calls out. A tentative, sweet note that breaks the immense silence. Then, another answers. Soon, a soft, beautiful chorus of birdsong begins to ripple through the forests and over the fields, welcoming the morning. It is a sound so pure, so incredibly ordinary, a gentle symphony that is played every morning since the beginning of the world. The young man by the river puts his photograph away. The boy in the guardhouse blows out his lamp, the small wisp of smoke curling up toward the ceiling. The baker slides his bread into the hot stone oven. The light grows just a little brighter, casting a soft, pearlescent glow over the mist. The world is suspended in this perfect, quiet dawn. It is the very edge of the morning. It is a moment of profound, quiet grace. A beautiful, tragic stillness, resting gently on the earth, in the very last moments before the sunrise. The summer sky stretched wide and pale, an endless canopy of quiet blue, as the very dust of the earth seemed to rise up and walk. It was a summer of profound and beautiful deceptions. The fields along the road were heavy with wheat, swaying gently in the warm, dry breeze, waiting for a harvest that would not come. The sunflowers turned their bright, open faces toward the light, entirely indifferent to the slow, heavy river of humanity beginning to flow past their roots. It was a season meant for sitting on wooden porches in the evening, for listening to the hum of bees, for children running barefoot through the tall grass. Instead, it became the summer of the road. If you were to close your eyes and listen to that road, you would not hear the sharp, sudden sounds of panic. You would hear a low, continuous murmur. The rhythmic, hypnotic shuffling of thousands of tired feet dragging through the soft, white dirt. The slow, rhythmic creaking of wooden cartwheels, bearing the weight of things that could not be left behind. It was the sound of a world uprooting itself, moving eastward toward the endless horizon, step by weary step. There is a strange, heavy quiet that falls over people when they leave everything they know. A solemnity that settles in the air. Families walked together, enveloped in a fine, powdery haze that coated their clothes, their eyelashes, their hair, turning them all into pale, moving ghosts against the vibrant green of the landscape. They carried with them the small, sudden illusions of the displaced. The quiet, unspoken belief that this was only temporary. That they would only need to walk for a few days, perhaps a week, until the storm passed and they could turn around and go home. You could see this innocent hope in the things they chose to carry. A young woman, her face flushed with the heat, clutched a delicate porcelain teapot to her chest, a wedding gift she simply could not bear to leave on the kitchen table. An elderly man, walking with a slow, deliberate limp, wore his finest winter coat over his shoulders despite the suffocating heat of the afternoon sun, carrying the weight of his pride and his past. A little boy, holding tightly to his mother's skirt, dragged a wooden toy horse by a string, its small, painted wheels leaving a tiny, wavering track in the dust beside the deep ruts of the wagons. They were not carrying provisions for a long journey, they were carrying the anchors of their normal lives, hoping the weight of them would somehow keep them tethered to the world they had just left behind. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became a physical presence, a heavy blanket resting on their shoulders. The air grew still and shimmering, blurring the line between the earth and the sky. The dust rose in thick, golden clouds, catching in their throats and making their eyes water. It was an exhausting, relentless warmth. Yet, even in this suffocating haze, there were profound moments of quiet grace. Beneath the sprawling, generous branches of a lone oak tree that stood by the side of the road, a small sanctuary of shade was formed. Here, the endless march would pause. Strangers, who only days before had lived entirely separate lives in entirely separate towns, now sank down into the cool grass side by side. They leaned against the rough bark of the tree, closing their eyes and letting out long, slow breaths of relief. In this quiet patch of shadow, the beautiful, everyday heroism of ordinary people began to reveal itself. A mother, her own lips dry and cracked from the wind, uncorked a glass bottle and poured a precious splash of tepid well water into a tin cup. But she did not drink it. Instead, she turned to the older woman sitting beside her, a stranger whose face was pale with exhaustion, and pressed the cold metal of the cup into her trembling hands. No words were spoken. None were needed. The older woman took a slow, deliberate sip, closing her eyes as the water cooled her throat, and then reached out to gently touch the mother's wrist in a silent, profound gesture of gratitude. Further down the road, a cart had broken its axle, the heavy wooden wheel splintering under the weight of a family's belongings. The father stood beside it, his shoulders slumped in quiet despair, staring down at the broken wood as if it were a puzzle he could not solve. He was so tired. The road ahead was so long. But he was not left alone in his quiet defeat. Slowly, without being asked, men began to step out of the moving river of dust. A farmer, a schoolteacher, a baker, men who did not know his name, but who knew the exact, heavy shape of his fear. Together, they knelt in the dirt. They wedged thick branches beneath the axle, their hands slipping on the dry wood, their breathing falling into a synchronized, rhythmic labor. They lifted the cart, their muscles straining, while the father slid the wheel back into place and bound it tight with thick leather straps. When the cart was righted, they dusted off their knees, nodded to the father, and simply folded themselves back into the endless walk. It was a fleeting, beautiful moment of brotherhood, born in the dust, dissolving back into the dust. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the fierce heat of the sun finally began to relent. The sky bruised into soft shades of lavender and bruised peach, casting long, peaceful shadows across the fields. The air cooled, and the scent of the dry earth grew richer, heavier. The vast, empty horizon before them seemed to swallow the last of the light, leaving them entirely alone in the growing dusk. The great migration slowed, and then stopped. Families pulled their carts off the road, settling into the tall grass for the night. The sound of shuffling feet was replaced by the comforting, domestic sounds of evening. The snapping of dry twigs. The strike of a match. Soon, hundreds of tiny, flickering campfires dotted the dark landscape like a reflection of the starry sky above. Around these small fires, the weary travelers huddled together, drawing warmth not just from the flames, but from the presence of one another. The dust of the day was wiped from their faces. Pieces of stale bread were broken and shared. Mothers sang soft, ancient lullabies to children who were already half asleep, their heads resting on rolled-up blankets. The melodies floated up into the night air, simple and pure, weaving through the smoke of the fires and drifting out over the quiet steppe. In the gentle glow of the embers, an old woman reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a letter from her grandson, written weeks ago, from a military camp far away. The paper was worn soft at the edges from being held so many times. She could not read the words in the dark, but she didn't need to. She knew them by heart. She sat by the fire, holding the paper to her chest, finding a profound, quiet solace in the memory of his voice. She imagined him sitting under this same vast, quiet sky, looking up at the same scatter of stars. It was a fragile thread of connection, pulling tight across the miles, holding her tethered to love in a world that felt increasingly unmoored. The illusions of the morning were beginning to fade now. The soft, quiet realization was settling over the camps that the journey would not be short. That the homes they had locked and left behind were moving further away with every passing hour, fading into memory. Yet, alongside this quiet sorrow, there was something else. A beautiful, resilient strength. They were stripped of their homes, their routines, their certainties. But out here, on the open road, under the vast and indifferent sky, they were discovering the profound weight of simple kindness. The shared water. The shared labor. The shared shade of a single tree. They were learning that when everything else is burned away by the heat of the sun, what remains is the quiet, unbreakable bond of simply being human together. The night deepens. The fires burn down to soft, glowing coals. The wind whispers softly through the dry grass, a gentle, soothing sound that carries no threats, only the ancient breath of the earth. The travelers pull their coats tighter around their shoulders, resting their heads against one another, and finally surrender to sleep. The road will be waiting for them in the morning, long and dusty and uncertain. But for now, in the quiet, breathing dark, they are safe. They are together. And they are resting. The sky did not break all at once. It began with a single, gentle drop against a cold cheek, a quiet promise that the season was turning. The golden, scorching heat of the summer had slowly surrendered to a pale, bruised sky. The wind that swept across the vast, open plains no longer carried the scent of dry dust and blooming sunflowers, but instead bore the crisp, heavy fragrance of wet pine needles and turning leaves. For days, the clouds had been gathering on the horizon, stacking upon themselves like great, gray mountains of soft cotton, turning the bright afternoons into a perpetual, quiet twilight. And then, with a soft, collective sigh, the heavens finally opened, and the autumn rains began to fall. It was not a violent storm. It was a slow, steady, endless weeping. A gentle, drumming rhythm that tapped against the canvas of tents, the wooden roofs of abandoned barns, and the wide brims of cloth caps. The water fell onto the fields, soaking into the dry, cracked earth that had been trampled by thousands of marching boots. At first, the ground drank it in eagerly, grateful for the cooling moisture. But the rain did not stop. It fell through the morning, it fell through the night, and it fell through the morning after that. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the landscape began to change. The long, winding dirt roads that stretched across the continent, the very paths that had carried the weight of nations all summer, began to soften. The fine, powdery dust turned into a rich, dark paste. And as the hours bled into days, that paste deepened into an endless, shifting ocean of mud. There is a strange, overwhelming peace that comes when the earth simply refuses to let you go any further. The great, heavy wagons sank up to their wooden axles, their wheels spinning hopelessly before finally coming to rest. The roar of engines, which had echoed across the countryside for months, sputtered and died, suffocated by the thick, clinging earth. The war, which had moved with such terrifying, relentless speed, was suddenly, quietly, caught in a trap of clay and water. The world ground to a heavy, exhausted halt. For the men caught out in the open, this forced stillness brought a heavy, damp chill that seeped deep into the fibers of their thick wool coats. They were stranded in a gray, watery world, where every step required a monumental, exhausting effort, the mud pulling at their boots with a greedy, sucking embrace. But with the stillness also came a profound, unexpected quiet. They no longer had to march. They no longer had to rush toward the unknown horizon. The rain had built a wall of water and earth around them, forcing them to stop, to sit, and to simply wait. Underneath the dripping eaves of a farmhouse, or beneath the heavy, dark green canvas of a stalled truck, men gathered together to find whatever dry sanctuary they could. In these small, shadowed spaces, the simple warmth of another human being became the most precious thing in the world. You could see it in the way they huddled close, shoulder to damp shoulder, sharing the meager heat of their tired bodies. You could see it in the careful, reverent way a man would strike a single, dry match, shielding the tiny, fragile flame with his cupped hands, leaning in to light a cigarette before passing it gently to his neighbor. The small orange ember would glow in the gray mist, illuminating exhausted faces that were softened by the quiet rhythm of the falling rain. When the body is cold and the world is wet, the mind inevitably wanders backward, seeking out the warmest places it has ever known. In the quiet waiting of the autumn mud, surrounded by a landscape drained of all its color, the men retreated into their memories. Sitting in the back of a canvas-covered wagon, listening to the rain tapping directly above his head, a young man reaches into the breast pocket of his uniform. His hands are cold, his knuckles red and stiff, but his movements are incredibly delicate. He pulls out a small, flat tin box, the only thing he has managed to keep entirely dry. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth, is a photograph. The edges are worn soft and white from being touched 1,000 times before. He holds it up to the pale, gray light. It is a picture of a woman standing on a wooden porch, a thick, woven shawl wrapped around her shoulders, smiling warmly at the camera. At her feet sits a small, scruffy dog, its tail blurred from wagging. As the young man looks at the image, the cold, damp walls of the wagon seem to melt away. He closes his eyes and takes a slow, deep breath. He is no longer trapped in a sea of mud. He is standing on that porch. He can hear the wooden floorboards creak beneath his boots. He can smell the wood smoke drifting from the chimney, the sweet, rich scent of roasted apples and cinnamon coming from the kitchen window. He can feel the heat of the parlor stove radiating against his cold hands. The drumming of the rain fades, becoming the familiar, comforting sound of autumn leaves rustling against the window panes of his childhood home. For a few precious minutes, he is completely safe. He is warm. He is home. Miles away, across the impassable, swampy fields, another boy sits in a shallow dugout carved into the side of a hill. The walls of his shelter are lined with wet pine branches, smelling sharply of the forest and the damp earth. He has draped his heavy woolen coat over his head like a tent, trying to create a tiny pocket of dryness. Resting on his bent knees is a small, battered notebook. He is holding a stub of a pencil, chewing gently on the end of it as he searches for the right words. He is writing a letter to his mother. He does not write about the rain, or the cold, or the mud that has swallowed his boots. He does not want her to worry. Instead, he writes about the things that anchor him to the world they share. He asks if the birch trees at the edge of their village have turned yellow yet. He asks if the roof of the barn has been patched before the winter snows arrive. He tells her that he had a dream about her freshly baked dark bread, the kind with the thick, crusty edges, and that he can almost taste it on his tongue. He presses the pencil to the paper, his cursive letters looping gracefully across the page. A single drop of water falls from the pine branches above, landing softly on the paper. The blue ink blooms outward, blurring a word into a soft, watercolor smudge. He smiles quietly to himself, carefully wiping the water away with his sleeve. He folds the letter, a fragile paper vessel holding all his love and all his hope, trusting that someday, somehow, it will find its way out of this gray wilderness and into her waiting hands. In this season of waiting, the vast, muddy plains became a landscape of hidden, silent dreams. There were no longer enemies separated by a shifting front line. There were only lonely, freezing boys, caught in the exact same rain, held in place by the exact same earth. They sat in their trenches and their wagons, listening to the same endless lullaby of the falling water. If you could have listened to their hearts, you would not have heard the drums of war. You would have heard the quiet ticking of mantle clocks, the crackle of hearth fires, the soft humming of lullabies, and the joyful barking of dogs running across manicured lawns. As the late afternoon slowly faded into evening, the light simply dissolved, turning the sky from gray to a deep, enveloping charcoal. The rain slowed to a misty drizzle, hanging in the air like a fine, silver veil. The world grew profoundly quiet, wrapped in a thick, insulating blanket of fog and dampness. The mud, heavy and unbroken, reflected the faint light of a hidden moon, transforming the desolate fields into a tranquil, shimmering lake of dark water. The men pulled their coats tighter around their shoulders, resting their heads against the wooden crates, the dirt walls, or the shoulders of their sleeping friends. The cold is a constant companion, but exhaustion is a heavy, gentle weight that finally pulls their eyelids shut. The war is entirely asleep tonight, trapped in the deep, impassable earth. The world is perfectly still. The rain continues its soft, rhythmic whisper against the ground, a soothing sound that washes away the dust of the summer, offering a quiet, peaceful rest to all those who are waiting in the dark, dreaming beautifully, and endlessly, of home. The very first breath of true winter did not arrive with a roar, but with a fragile, crystalline silence that simply froze the world in place. Overnight, the endless, exhausting oceans of autumn mud stopped moving. The deep, jagged ruts carved by thousands of heavy wheels grew perfectly still, hardening into ridges of solid iron. The puddles that had reflected the gray, weeping skies transformed into smooth, clouded panes of glass. And then, the sky emptied itself of all its heavy dampness, turning the color of pale, brushed silver. The temperature began to drop, slipping down, pulling a deep, numbing stillness over the vast plains that stretched toward the gates of Moscow. And then came the snow. It began so gently. Small, delicate flakes drifting down from the heavens, entirely indifferent to the exhaustion of the men below. They fell with a slow, hypnotic grace, swirling lightly in the biting air before coming to rest on the stiff shoulders of wool coats, on the brims of uniform caps, and on the long, dark barrels of quiet rifles. It was an innocent, beautiful snowfall. It did not judge the earth it landed upon. With a soft, maternal patience, it simply began to cover the world, wrapping the shattered, weary landscape in a pristine blanket of blinding white. There is a profound, surreal beauty in a heavy snow. As the flakes continued to fall, hour after quiet hour, the sharp edges of the war were smoothed away. The jagged, broken remains of a stone wall became a gentle, rolling dune. A stranded wagon, left behind in the frozen mud, was transformed into a soft, white sculpture. The vast, scarred fields were swept clean, turning into a beautiful, untouched sea of frost. Even the sounds of the world were swallowed by the falling snow, muffled and hushed, leaving only the sound of a cold wind sighing through the dark, bare branches of the birch trees. In this beautiful, frozen stillness, the cold became a living, breathing presence. It was a biting frost that seeped through the thickest layers of cloth, finding its way into the very bones of the men who stood watching the horizon. The air grew so incredibly brittle that every breath taken felt like inhaling tiny, glittering diamonds. When the men exhaled, their breath bloomed in front of them in small, thick clouds of white vapor, rising softly into the air like fragile ghosts before vanishing into the night. But in the deep, aching grip of this frost, something incredibly beautiful blossomed in the snow. Stripped of all other comforts, with the heat of the summer entirely forgotten, the men found their sanctuary in one another. In a shallow trench carved out of the frozen earth, two young soldiers sit shoulder to shoulder. They are wrapped in everything they own, layers of stiff, cold wool, scarves pulled up over their noses, their hands tucked deep into their armpits. Between them, they share a single, oversized winter coat, draped heavily over both of their trembling frames. They sit entirely still, their sides pressed tightly together, pooling the tiny, precious amount of warmth their bodies can still produce. They do not speak of the front line, or the vast distance they have traveled, or the heavy silence of the snowy fields before them. They speak in slow, soft whispers, their voices muffled by their scarves. They trade memories of warmth like precious coins. The boy on the left, his eyelashes dusted with white frost, whispers about a ceramic stove in the center of his grandmother's parlor. He describes the way the glazed tiles felt against his back after a long day of playing in the snow, the deep, radiating heat that would slowly melt the ice from his mittens. The man beside him closes his eyes and listens, letting the image warm his mind. In return, he tells a quiet story of a summer afternoon, lying in a patch of tall, sun-baked grass, feeling the heavy, golden heat of the sun pressing down on his chest until he fell asleep. Here, in the freezing dark, sharing a single coat, these shared memories are a lifeline. They huddle closer, a quiet, unspoken brotherhood forged in the deep freeze. They are keeping each other alive not with weapons, but with the simple, miraculous heat of their shared humanity. Further down the line, a sentry stands alone at his post. He shifts his weight slowly from foot to foot, listening to the sharp, satisfying crunch of the dry snow beneath his boots. His hands are numb, hidden inside thick, clumsy mittens. Inside his breast pocket, resting directly over his heart, is a letter from his wife. It has been there for weeks. He cannot take it out to read it. The paper has become so cold and brittle that he fears it might shatter like thin ice if he tries to unfold it. His fingers are too stiff to trace the graceful loops of her handwriting anyway. But he doesn't need to see the words. He knows exactly what they say. He rests his mittened hand against his chest, feeling the small, stiff square of paper through the heavy layers of his uniform. He closes his eyes and lets the icy wind wash over his face. In the quiet dark of his mind, he is not standing in a frozen field outside of Moscow. He is sitting at his small kitchen table. She is standing at the stove, pouring steaming water from a copper kettle into a porcelain cup. He can see the steam curling up into the warm air of the room. He can smell the rich, earthy scent of the black tea. He imagines reaching out to wrap his cold hands around the hot porcelain, feeling the sudden, stinging joy of the heat rushing into his palms. A sudden gust of wind pulls him gently back to the present. The wind carries a fine mist of snow across his face, but he is not afraid. The letter over his heart feels like a small, burning ember. It is a quiet, defiant warmth that the winter cannot touch. As the deep night settles over the earth, the snow finally stops falling. The heavy gray clouds slowly part, peeling back to reveal a sky of breathtaking clarity. Without the dampness of the autumn to obscure it, the night sky is a vast, velvet dome sprinkled with a million piercing stars. They do not twinkle softly tonight, they shine with a hard, brilliant light, like shattered glass scattered across the heavens. The moonlight spills down over the untouched snow, turning the entire world into a glowing, silver dreamscape. The frost has stopped time entirely. The rivers are locked in thick, silent armor. The trees stand perfectly still, their branches heavy with white rime, like ancient, sleeping giants. The war is buried, wrapped tightly in a thick, insulating quilt of snow. The men in the trenches pull their shared blankets up a little higher, tucking their chins down against their chests. The rhythmic, synchronized rising and falling of their breathing is the only movement in the stillness. They are so incredibly tired, and the cold is a heavy, gentle weight pulling at their eyelids. The freezing air demands stillness, and finally, they surrender to it. They drift into sleep, held safe by the quiet rhythm of their companions' breathing, trusting the steady beating of the heart beside them. The world around them is locked in a deep, crystalline slumber. It is a peaceful, motionless night. The snow is perfect and undisturbed. The stars stand watch over the silver fields. And for now, in the beautiful, numbing quiet of the frost, all is entirely, perfectly still. The snow fell over the grand city not as a storm, but as a vast, heavy curtain of white silence, wrapping the majestic avenues in a profound and sorrowful sleep. To walk through these streets in the deep midwinter is to walk through a beautiful, frozen painting. The wide, elegant boulevards, once alive with the cheerful clattering of tramcars, the ringing of bicycle bells, and the lively hum of a million voices, now lie perfectly, stunningly still. The grand palaces and towering monuments are draped in thick mantles of undisturbed white. The great river, which used to flow dark and swift beneath the stone bridges, has been halted completely, turned into a solid, sweeping ribbon of pale ice. The entire city seems to be holding its breath, suspended in a quiet, crystalline dream. There is a deep, overwhelming hush that settles over a place when all the machinery of modern life quietly stops. There are no engines. There are no sirens. There is only the soft, rhythmic crunch of footsteps pressing into the dry snow, and the low, mournful sigh of the wind sweeping off the frozen gulf. It is a silence so large, so vast, that it makes the people walking through it seem incredibly small, like fragile shadows moving slowly across a landscape of pure, glowing alabaster. But the true story of this winter is not found out on the empty, sweeping boulevards. It is found inside. It is found behind the heavy wooden doors, behind the thick stone walls of the towering apartment buildings, and the quiet, dim sanctuaries where the people have retreated. The frost, indifferent to walls and windows, has slowly crept indoors. It blooms in beautiful, intricate patterns across the inside of the glass, delicate ferns and feathers of ice that glow faintly in the pale moonlight. The grand, high-ceilinged rooms, once filled with the warmth of crackling ceramic stoves and the golden light of chandeliers, are now deeply, entirely cold. To survive this deep freeze, life has simply slowed down. Every movement becomes deliberate, careful, and remarkably gentle. Inside a small room, a family sits huddled together on a wide bed, wrapped in a heavy cocoon of everything they own. They wear their winter coats over thick woolen sweaters, they have draped heavy, woven rugs over their shoulders, they wear hats and scarves pulled up tight against their cheeks. They look like gentle, bundled travelers who have pitched a tent inside their own home. In this room, the air is so cold that every word spoken blooms into a soft, white cloud. But they do not speak much. They conserve their energy, their breath, their strength. Instead, they communicate through quiet, tender gestures. A mother reaches out from beneath a heavy quilt to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind her daughter's ear. Her hand is trembling slightly from the cold, but her touch is impossibly soft, carrying a profound, quiet weight of love. It is a love that needs no language, a fierce, silent vow to keep the other warm, to keep the other safe in the dark. The hunger has settled over the city not as a sharp, sudden pain, but as a quiet, exhausting shadow. It makes the body heavy, and it makes the mind drift. Yet, in the face of this overwhelming emptiness, the people have discovered a beautiful, heartbreaking grace. In a neighboring apartment, an elderly man and woman sit across from one another at a small wooden kitchen table. The room is illuminated only by the faint, flickering glow of a tiny wick floating in a shallow dish of machine oil. Between them on the table rests their daily ration. It is a single, small square of dark, heavy bread. It is barely larger than a bar of soap. This small piece of bread is the absolute center of their universe. The old man takes a small pocket knife and, with the precision of a jeweler, begins to cut the square perfectly in half. His hands are slow, his eyes focused entirely on the task. He makes sure the blade goes straight down, ensuring that neither half is a fraction of an inch larger than the other. As he cuts, a few tiny, precious crumbs fall onto the wooden table. He takes one half of the dark bread and gently pushes it across the table to his wife. She looks at it, and then she looks at him. Her eyes are tired, shadowed by the dim light, but they are incredibly soft. She reaches out with a damp fingertip, carefully pressing it against the fallen crumbs on the table, lifting every single speck of dust and placing it on her tongue. Then, she breaks off a tiny corner of her own bread. She reaches across the table and presses it gently into his hand. He shakes his head slowly, a quiet refusal. But she insists, leaving the small morsel in his palm before pulling her hands back into her lap. It is a microscopic amount of food, offering almost no physical sustenance at all. But it is not about the calories. It is an offering. It is a beautiful, quiet heroism. In giving away the very thing she needs most in the world, she is preserving her soul. She is telling him, in the only way she has left, that his life is more precious to her than her own. They sit in the flickering shadows, eating their small rations with agonizing slowness, anchored to the world by the profound, unbreakable dignity of their shared humanity. While the body starves, the spirit searches desperately for light. And in this freezing, dark city, that light often comes not from a flame, but from a sound. Deep within the heart of the building, behind a closed door, the air is just as biting, just as unforgiving. But in the corner of this room sits a grand piano, its polished wood dull under a layer of fine dust and frost. Sitting on the bench is a young woman. She is wearing a heavy men's overcoat, and upon her hands are thick woolen gloves with the very tips of the fingers cut off. She sits entirely still for a long moment, closing her eyes, gathering a breath that seems to pull from the very depths of her tired lungs. And then, her fingers touch the cold ivory keys. She does not play a grand, sweeping symphony. She does not have the strength for thunder. Instead, she plays a soft, slow, achingly beautiful nocturne. The notes rise up into the freezing air, fragile and pure, like tiny drops of warm water falling onto the ice. The music is hesitant at first, her stiff fingers struggling to find their old grace, but slowly, the melody begins to flow. It is a gentle, melancholic song, full of longing, full of memory, full of a quiet, stubborn defiance. The sound escapes the room. It drifts under the heavy wooden door, floating out into the dark, freezing corridor. It travels up the stairwell, wrapping around the wrought iron banisters. It slides through the ventilation grates, weaving its way into the silent apartments above and below. In their cold, shadowed rooms, the neighbors hear it. The mother and daughter stop breathing for a moment, listening to the delicate cascade of notes. The old man and woman at the kitchen table close their eyes, letting the music wash over them. For a few miraculous minutes, they are not hungry. They are not freezing. They are transported. The music builds a sudden, invisible bridge between all of them, a golden thread tying their isolated rooms together. It reminds them of the grand concert halls before the war, of the warm, velvet seats and the glittering chandeliers. It reminds them of the beauty that human hands are capable of creating, even when those hands are numb with cold. It is a quiet rebellion against the darkness. The musician plays on, her breath pluming in the air, offering her last reserves of energy to feed the starving souls of the people listening in the dark. Hours pass, and the night deepens, wrapping the city in its darkest, quietest embrace. The tiny oil lamps burn out, one by one, leaving the apartments illuminated only by the pale, silver glow of the moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. Beside a frosted window, a young boy sits wrapped in a thick blanket, peering through a small circle he has rubbed clear in the ice. He is looking up at the sky. Above the frozen spires and the dark, silent domes of the city, the stars are brilliant and sharp, scattered like diamond dust across the black velvet of the night. He holds a small, battered notebook in his lap. With a stub of a pencil, moving entirely by the light of the moon, he is writing a diary. He writes in slow, careful letters. He does not write about the cold. He writes about his memories of the summer gardens. He describes the exact shade of the green leaves on the linden trees. He writes about the way the warm sun felt on his face as he chased his friends down the gravel paths, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, the sound of the brass band playing in the pavilion. He is locking the summer inside his paper, keeping it safe, preserving the memory of warmth so that it is not forgotten in the endless ice. He finishes his sentence, blows softly on the paper, and closes the book, tucking it carefully beneath his mattress. He pulls his blanket up to his chin, curling his knees up to his chest to preserve his heat. The city is entirely asleep now. The great buildings stand like silent sentinels in the snow. The river remains a frozen, unmoving road. The frost continues its quiet work, tightening its grip on the stones and the glass. But inside, beneath the heavy layers of wool and the deep, encompassing quiet, the tiny, beautiful embers of the human spirit refuse to go out. They glow with a soft, steady resilience. They share their crumbs. They play their music in the dark. They dream beautifully, endlessly, of the spring. And in that quiet, stubborn dreaming, the city locked in ice remains profoundly, undeniably alive. To trust the deep, sleeping water, one must first learn to listen to the whisper of the ice. Beyond the dark, ancient forests, where the pine trees stand like silent sentinels under the heavy snow, the land simply falls away into a vast, flat expanse of endless white. This is the Great Lake, a massive inland sea that the winter has gently touched and turned to stone. In the warm months, its waves would lap rhythmically against the rocky shores, carrying the boats of fishermen under the golden sun. But now, in the very heart of the deep freeze, the water is entirely hidden beneath a thick, heavy armor of ice and drifting snow. It is a landscape of profound, overwhelming emptiness, bathed only in the pale, silver glow of the moon. To step out onto this frozen ocean is to step out of the world you know. The familiar sounds of the earth, the rustle of leaves, the call of a night bird, the comforting crunch of dirt beneath a boot, all vanish. Out here, there is only the wind, sweeping uninterrupted across the miles of flat ice, and the deep, resonant silence of the frozen deep. Yet, in the very middle of this lonely, moonlit void, there is a pulse of life. A slow, determined heartbeat moving across the ice in the dead of night. Inside the small, cramped cabin of a battered wooden truck, a man sits with his hands gripping a freezing steering wheel. He is wrapped in so many layers of old, coarse wool that he can barely turn his shoulders. A thick scarf is pulled up high over his nose, leaving only his tired, gentle eyes exposed to the dark. The heater in the truck broke weeks ago, and the temperature inside the cabin is exactly the same as the biting air outside. Frost has bloomed in beautiful, intricate ferns across the edges of the windshield, framing his view of the endless, white path ahead. He drives entirely in the dark. To use headlights would be to announce his presence to the sky, so he navigates only by the soft, milky illumination of the stars reflecting off the snow. He follows the faint, shallow ruts left by the tires of the truck that passed this way an hour before him. It is a slow, methodical journey. The engine hums with a low, steady vibration, a comforting purr that vibrates through the soles of his boots and up into his tired bones. Beside him, the door of the truck is not fully closed. It is propped open just a few inches, tethered by a piece of worn leather. The freezing wind rushes through the gap, biting at his side, swirling the loose snow into the cabin. He does not close the door. It is a quiet, unspoken rule of the ice. Should the deep water suddenly wake, should the frozen surface begin to give way, that open door is his only chance to step out into the night and roll to safety. It is a constant, chilling reminder of the fragility of the ground beneath his tires. But he does not look at the door with fear. He accepts it with a calm, stoic grace, a necessary companion on this lonely road. Behind him, in the back of the truck, rests his cargo. It is not heavy artillery, or crates of ammunition, or the grand machinery of empires. It is something infinitely more precious, something so profoundly simple that it holds the weight of thousands of lives. It is flour. Dozens of heavy, canvas sacks filled with simple, pale flour. As the truck rolls slowly over the uneven ice, the tires softly crunching against the snow, he thinks about those sacks. He thinks about the quiet, dark city that is waiting for him on the other side of this frozen expanse. He knows that in those cold, shadowed apartments, mothers are listening to the wind, holding their sleeping children, waiting for the morning ration. He imagines the flour turning into warm, dark bread. He imagines the small, careful hands of an old woman breaking off a piece to share with her neighbor. He imagines the soft, relieved smiles that this cargo will bring. This thought, this beautiful, ordinary thought of bread and warmth, is the gentle engine that drives him forward through the darkest hours of the night. The lake is not entirely silent. As the heavy weight of the truck presses down upon the frozen surface, the ice speaks. It is a sound unlike any other in the world. It is a deep, resonant booming that echoes through the water below, like the slow, heavy pluck of a giant cello string. Sometimes it is a sharp, sudden crack that races across the expanse, branching out like a bolt of lightning trapped in the ice. It is a terrifying, beautiful song of the earth. When the ice groans beneath him, the driver does not panic. He takes a slow, deep breath, pulling the freezing air into his lungs. He whispers softly to the steering wheel, a gentle, rhythmic hum that matches the pitch of the shifting ice. Sleep, he murmurs to the dark water below. Just stay asleep a little longer. He treats the lake not as an enemy, but as a vast, slumbering giant that he must tiptoe across. He respects the deep, cold water, and in return, he trusts it to hold him up. In the middle of the lake, miles from either shore, he sees a shape emerging from the silver gloom. It is another truck, moving slowly in the opposite direction, returning from the city. As the two lonely vehicles pass each other on this invisible road, they slow to a gentle crawl. The drivers cannot see one another's faces in the dark, but they roll down their windows just a fraction. A hand reaches out into the bitter wind, holding a single, unlit cigarette. The other hand reaches back, offering a small, wooden matchbox. No words are exchanged over the roar of the wind. They share only the fleeting, bright flare of a match, illuminating their tired, frostbitten faces for just a second. In that brief, golden light, there is a profound universe of understanding. They are two solitary souls holding up the world, sharing a moment of quiet brotherhood in the very center of a frozen ocean. The match goes out. The hands retreat. The trucks roll on. But the warmth of that small, human connection lingers in the cabin long after the red glow of the other truck's taillights fades into the blowing snow. Hours pass, melting into a timeless blur of white ice and black sky. Finally, the deep, dark line of the distant shore begins to materialize against the horizon. The driver feels a soft, familiar relief wash over his tired shoulders. He has crossed the void. He has brought the flour. When he arrives in the quiet, ruined outskirts of the city, the unloading is done in silence. Men with hollow cheeks and gentle hands come out of the shadows to carry the sacks away. But his journey is not over. The truck will not return across the ice empty. From the dark doorways of a nearby building, a small group of people emerges. They are evacuees, those too weak or too young to survive another month in the starving city. They move slowly, like fragile ghosts bundled in endless layers of coats, shawls, and blankets. The driver steps out of his cabin, his boots crunching on the solid ground, and moves to the back of the truck to help them climb in. He reaches down, offering his thick, mittened hand to a young mother. She is trembling, holding a small bundle tightly against her chest. He pulls her gently up into the truck bed, guiding her to a corner where she can sit out of the wind. He looks down at the bundle in her arms. It is a little boy, no more than 5 years old. The child's face is pale, his eyes wide and dark, staring up at the giant man in the heavy coat. The driver reaches into his deep, woolen pocket. His fingers brush past his own spare gloves, past the cold metal of his keys, until he finds what he is looking for. It is a single, small piece of hardened sugar, saved from his own meager rations days ago. He pulls it out, the crystalline surface catching the faint moonlight. He kneels down slowly, making himself as small as he can, and holds the piece of sugar out in the palm of his thick mitten. The little boy looks at the sugar, then looks up at his mother. She nods, a tear slipping down her cold cheek. The boy reaches out with a tiny, trembling hand and takes the sweet. He places it in his mouth, and for the first time in what must be a very long time, a soft, genuine smile touches his lips. The driver smiles back, his eyes crinkling behind his heavy scarf. He takes off one of his own woolen blankets, the one he uses to cover his legs in the freezing cabin, and gently drapes it over the mother and child, tucking the edges in tightly around their shoulders. "It will be a smooth ride," he whispers to them, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "You are safe now. Just close your eyes and sleep." He secures the canvas flap over the back of the truck, turning the bed into a dark, sheltered sanctuary against the wind. Then, he climbs back into his cabin. He settles into the freezing seat, rests his hands on the familiar curve of the steering wheel, and props the door open just a few inches once again. As he turns the truck around, aiming the hood back toward the vast, dark expanse of the frozen lake, the sky in the east begins to change. The absolute blackness of the night softens, melting into deep, bruised shades of violet and indigo. The stars begin to fade, one by one, surrendering to the approaching dawn. The driver takes a deep breath, inhaling the sharp, clean scent of the ice. He is so incredibly tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that weighs his eyelids down. But behind him, under the canvas tarp, the children are sleeping. Ahead of him, the ice is waiting. He presses his foot gently on the pedal, and the wheels leave the solid earth, rolling out onto the smooth, glassy surface of the deep water. The lake groans, a slow, deep song welcoming him back. The driver hums along with it, a quiet, peaceful melody of endurance. He is just a man in a wooden truck, crossing a frozen sea. But in the quiet hush of the breaking dawn, his lonely, rhythmic footsteps on the ice are the very sound of hope, walking steadily through the dark, leading the way toward the light of a new day. There is an ocean made entirely of earth and wind, where the sky is so impossibly large it can make a man forget the sound of his own name. The long, slow march eastward has finally left the familiar, comforting shadows of the ancient forests behind. The dark, sheltering canopy of the pines and the gentle, rolling hills have simply melted away, revealing a landscape of profound, terrifying beauty. This is the steppe. It is a vast, endless sea of tall, wild grass, stretching out in every direction until it meets the curved edge of the world. There are no walls here. There are no fences, no valleys, no steeples to mark the distance. There is only the uninterrupted earth, and a great, sweeping dome of pale, brilliant blue pressing down from above. To step out into this boundless open space is to feel instantly, overwhelmingly small. For a young man who has spent his entire life in the narrow, winding cobblestone streets of a crowded city, or nestled in the deep, protective embrace of a mountain valley, the steppe is a profound shock to the soul. All the natural boundaries that once held him, that defined his world and made him feel safe, have been stripped away. He is left entirely exposed, a solitary, fragile speck of dust wandering slowly across the vast, and different face of the earth. In this beautiful, golden emptiness, the silence is not truly silent. It is filled with the eternal, restless voice of the wind. The wind of the steppe never stops. It comes from hundreds of miles away, carrying the dry, sun-baked scent of crushed sage and wild thyme. It moves across the plains in great, invisible waves, parting the tall grasses and making them bow and sway in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It whispers against the canvas of the heavy tents. It whistles a low, mournful tune through the wooden spokes of the cart wheels. If you close your eyes and listen, truly listen, the wind sounds like a chorus of distant, whispered voices, calling out across the miles. It is a sound that reaches deep into the heart, waking a profound, universal loneliness that slumbers in the chest of every soldier. During a brief, exhausted halt in the mid-afternoon heat, a young man sits down in the deep grass. He takes off his heavy metal helmet, letting it fall with a soft thud into the dirt, and runs a dusty, trembling hand through his damp hair. The wind immediately catches it, cooling his forehead, drying the sweat on his brow. He looks out at the horizon, trying to find a single point to anchor his gaze, but there is nothing. Only the shimmering heat rising from the golden earth. He feels so incredibly far from home. He reaches into his tunic, beneath the heavy wool, and pulls out a small, folded piece of paper. It is a letter from his mother. The edges are frayed, the creases soft and worn from being opened and refolded 100 times. He smooths it out against his knee. He does not read the words, he already knows them by heart. He traces the loops of her handwriting with a dirty fingertip. She wrote about the window boxes in front of their small house, bursting with bright red geraniums. She wrote about the stray cat that finally let her pet it on the back porch. Sitting in this terrifying vastness, he tries desperately to picture that small, walled garden. He tries to remember the feeling of the cool, damp bricks of his house. But the endless, open sky above him threatens to swallow the memory entirely. He clutches the fragile piece of paper tightly in his fist, holding it against his chest like a shield. It is his only tether to the world he once knew, a tiny, precious anchor keeping him from floating away into the endless blue. Miles away, across that same rippling ocean of grass, another boy sits resting in the shade of a broken wagon. This is his country, the earth he was born to defend, but the steppe is foreign to him, too. He grew up far to the north, where the world is measured in dense birch groves and winding rivers. Out here, under this massive sky, he feels exactly the same aching vulnerability. He leans his head back against the warm wood of the wagon wheel and closes his eyes, listening to the rushing sound of the wind in the dry grass. To him, it sounds like the soothing hum of his mother's voice as she hung the damp laundry on the line in their small courtyard. He imagines the smell of the wet cotton. He imagines the way her cool, gentle hands felt when she would brush the hair out of his eyes. He is so tired. The heavy rifle resting across his lap feels like an absurd toy in the face of this vast, eternal landscape. He doesn't want to march toward the great, distant river. He just wants to lie down in the grass, pull the earth up to his chin like a blanket, and be tucked into bed. The steppe does not care about the colors of their uniforms. It does not care about the languages they speak or the empires they serve. The vastness reduces them all to their simplest, most fragile forms. They are thousands of lonely children, far from their mothers, walking slowly through a beautiful, empty wilderness. In the face of such profound isolation, the men draw closer to one another. The bonds between them become the only walls they have left. As the afternoon wears on and the sun begins its slow descent, a soldier reaches for his heavy canvas canteen. He unscrews the cap and takes a slow sip of the tepid, metallic-tasting water. He is incredibly thirsty, but he stops. He lowers the canteen and passes it to the man sitting beside him, a man who has not spoken a word in 2 days, his eyes hollow with homesickness. The second man takes the canteen with trembling hands. He drinks, the water soothing his cracked lips, and then hands it back with a slow, grateful nod. There is no grand speech. There is only a soft pat on the shoulder, a shared look of quiet understanding. They are adrift in the same ocean. They are anchoring one another. It is a small, quiet moment of everyday heroism, the beautiful, stubborn refusal to let the vastness strip away their humanity. As evening approaches, the steppe transforms. The long, drawn-out twilight of the open plains is a breathtaking spectacle. The sky bleeds from bright blue into brilliant streaks of spun gold, crushed peach, and deep, bruised lavender. The setting sun casts shadows that stretch for miles, turning the rolling waves of grass into a sea of dark copper and violet. The oppressive heat of the day finally breaks, and the wind turns refreshingly cool, carrying the sweet, damp promise of evening dew. The great march comes to a halt for the night. Slowly, beautifully, the dark landscape is dotted with hundreds of tiny, flickering campfires, like a reflection of the stars beginning to pierce the twilight above. Around one of these small fires, men huddle closely together, their knees drawn up to their chests. They share the meager warmth, watching the orange embers glow in the center of their circle. From the shadows, the soft, reedy notes of a harmonica begin to play. It is a slow, mournful folk tune, a song about a wandering traveler longing for the hearth fire of his youth. The melody rises up into the vast, empty sky, fragile and pure, weaving perfectly into the constant whisper of the wind. No one speaks. The men stare into the flames, their faces soft and relaxed in the dancing light. They are all thinking of the same things. They are thinking of the kitchens they left behind. They are thinking of the soft beds they used to sleep in. They are listening to the harmonica and letting the music carry them, just for a moment, all the way back home. When the fire finally burns down to soft, gray ash, the men lie down in the grass. The earth beneath them is still holding onto the warmth of the sun, offering a gentle, comforting heat against their tired backs. They pull their coarse wool blankets up over their shoulders. Above them, the night sky is an absolute revelation. Without a single tree or mountain peak to obstruct the view, the heavens are a massive, overwhelming dome of crushed diamonds. The Milky Way arches directly overhead, a glowing, pale bridge stretching from one end of the earth to the other. There are so many stars that it feels as though they could reach up and brush them with their fingertips. It is terrifying, and it is incredibly beautiful. The young man from the mountains, and the young man from the north, both look up at the exact same blanket of stars. They let out long, slow breaths, their chests rising and falling in time with the quiet earth. The wind sweeps over them, no longer a lonely sigh, but a gentle, rhythmic lullaby, rocking them into the dark. They close their eyes, trusting the vast, beautiful step to hold them safely through the night, as they drift into sleep, dreaming endlessly of the mothers who are waiting for them at the edge of the world. Even when the world above is broken into pieces, the heart still beats in the quiet dark below. The sun is beginning its slow, weary descent over the great river, pulling a veil of deep, bruised red across the vast sky. It is the hour of twilight, a time that usually belongs to the gentle clinking of supper plates and the soft calling of mothers bringing their children in from the yard. But here, in this city that has lost its shape, the twilight falls upon a landscape that has been entirely, surrealistically transformed. The air is thick with a fine, powdery dust of crushed brick and ancient plaster. As the dying sun catches this dust, the entire world seems to glow with a mournful, luminous amber. It softens the jagged edges of the broken walls. It bathes the shattered cobblestones in a warm, forgiving light. The great apartment blocks, once teeming with the beautiful, chaotic rhythm of thousands of lives, now stand open to the wind. They look like fragile, discarded dollhouses. If you look closely through the drifting haze, you can see the remnants of ordinary life still clinging stubbornly to the exposed walls. A strip of cheerful yellow wallpaper with faded blue flowers. A wooden chair sitting perfectly upright on a floor that simply ends in midair. A framed mirror, miraculously unbroken, reflecting the vast, quiet expanse of the ruby sky. There is a profound, eerie hush that settles over the ruins as the shadows begin to stretch and lengthen. The grand avenues, where tramcars used to sing their metallic songs, are silent, choked with the debris of a fallen world. The wind sweeps off the water, whistling a low, lonely tune through the empty window frames. It is a hauntingly beautiful, deeply sorrowful piece. The city is resting. But beneath this fractured, silent surface, away from the fading light of the red sun, the true pulse of the city continues to beat. Down narrow, stone steps, beneath the heavy, vaulted arches of deep cellars, the people have made a new world in the dark. It is a world of shadows and whispers, smelling of damp earth, old soot, and the faint, sweet scent of unwashed wool. Here, hidden away from the sky, the true, quiet heroism of the everyday endures. In one corner of a sprawling basement, illuminated only by the fragile, trembling flame of a single candle, a family sits huddled on a mattress of folded coats and thin blankets. The light paints their faces in soft, warm shades of gold and deep orange. A young mother sits with her back against the cool, rough stone of the cellar wall. Her face is pale, smeared with a smudge of gray ash, but her eyes are incredibly bright and entirely focused on the small bundle resting in her lap. It is her little boy. He is wrapped in a thick, woolen shawl that is far too large for him, making him look like a tiny, fragile bird nestled in a nest of heavy yarn. He is trembling, not entirely from the cold, but from the overwhelming, incomprehensible weight of the world above. His small hands grip the fabric of his mother's dress, his knuckles white in the dim light. The mother does not tell him to be brave. She does not speak of the war. Instead, she leans her head down, resting her cheek against the soft, dusty crown of his hair, and she begins to hum. It is a sound so low, so incredibly gentle, that it barely disturbs the stillness of the cellar. It is an old nursery tune, a simple, lilting melody that rises and falls like the gentle breathing of the sea. The little boy closes his eyes, pressing his face into the warmth of her chest. He can feel the vibration of her humming deep within her ribs. It is a steady, rhythmic thrumming that matches the beating of his own frightened heart, slowing it down, soothing the edges of his panic. She begins to whisper to him, her voice as soft as velvet in the dark. She points to the flickering shadows dancing on the arched ceiling above them. "Look," she murmurs, her breath warm against his ear. "Do you see the shadows? They are just putting on a play for us. See that one there? That is a great, clumsy bear, dancing on his hind legs." The boy slowly opens one eye, following her pointing finger. The trembling flame of the candle makes the shadow leap and waver. "And over there," she continues, her voice weaving a beautiful, protective spell around him, "that is a tall ship with its sails unfurled, sailing across the dark water. They are just shadows, my love. Just shapes made of light and dark. They cannot reach us here. We are safe in the earth." It is a profound, breathtaking act of love. She is taking the terrifying darkness and turning it into a canvas of imagination. She is building an invisible fortress around his mind, a sanctuary of stories where the war cannot enter. Slowly, wonderfully, the boy's grip on her dress begins to loosen. His breathing deepens, falling into a slow, peaceful rhythm. The tension melts from his small shoulders, and he drifts into sleep, held securely in the unbreakable embrace of his mother's quiet courage. Just a few feet away, in the same sheltering gloom, two older neighbors sit shoulder to shoulder on a wooden crate. They are bundled in heavy winter coats, their hands tucked deep into their pockets. Between them, they share a profound, comfortable silence that only comes from knowing someone for a lifetime. The old man reaches into his pocket and slowly draws out a small, dented tin. He pries the lid off with a quiet click. Inside, there is a single, stale sugar drop. It is a tiny, precious luxury, saved for weeks. He does not eat it. He gently picks it up between his thumb and forefinger and holds it out to the woman sitting beside him. She looks at the small, clouded jewel of sugar, and then up at his withered face. A soft, tired smile touches the corners of her mouth. She shakes her head slowly, a silent refusal. But he insists, gently pressing the sweet into her gloved hand. She closes her fingers around it, entirely moved by this small, beautiful sacrifice. "Do you remember," she whispers, her voice raspy but full of warmth, "the bakery on the corner of the square? Before all this?" The old man leans back against the wall, closing his eyes. "I remember," he murmurs. "The smell of the yeast in the morning. It would drift down the street before the sun even came up. They made those little sweet rolls with the crushed almonds. And the cherry preserves," she adds, softly. "So sweet they made your teeth ache." In the dim, damp cellar, surrounded by the ruins of their lives, they begin to rebuild their city with their words. They talk about the summer evenings walking along the embankment, the sound of the brass band playing in the park, the way the river sparkled like crushed glass in the afternoon sun. They speak of these things not with bitter sorrow, but with a deep, reverent love. Their shared memories become a glowing hearth fire in the dark, warming their spirits, keeping the beautiful ghost of their city entirely alive in their hearts. They are starving, they are exhausted, but in this quiet corner of the underground, they are completely wealthy in memory and grace. Up above, on the fractured surface of the world, the red twilight has finally surrendered to the deep, enveloping blue of the night. The ruins cast long, ink-black shadows across the rubble. The air grows sharp and cold. Sitting in the hollowed-out shell of a shattered building, a young soldier rests his heavy head against a piece of fallen masonry. His uniform is coated in a thick layer of gray dust, making him look like a statue carved from the very ruins he is guarding. He is so incredibly tired that his bones feel like lead. The rifle rests across his lap, heavy and cold. He sits perfectly still, looking up at the sky. Through the jagged, broken roof, the stars are beginning to appear, pale and distant. And then, he hears it. It is incredibly faint. It drifts up through a narrow crack in the floorboards beneath his boots. It is the sound of the mother in the cellar, still humming her gentle lullaby. The melody is muffled by the stone and the earth, but it reaches him, a soft, human vibration in the endless ruin. The young man closes his eyes. He does not know who is singing. He does not know if it is a mother, or a sister, or a grandmother. He only knows that it is the most beautiful sound he has ever heard. It is the sound of life, enduring beautifully and stubbornly in the dark. It is the sound of the very thing he is sitting in the dust to protect. The simple, quiet melody washes over him, easing the deep ache in his shoulders. It reminds him of his own home, of his own mother moving quietly through the kitchen in the early hours of the morning. It makes him feel less alone. He takes a slow, deep breath, pulling the cold night air into his lungs, and lets it out in a long, peaceful sigh. The city is broken. The stones have fallen. But the soul of the place has simply retreated into the earth, wrapping itself in the warm, unbreakable threads of human love. The candle in the cellar finally flickers and goes out, leaving the families in absolute darkness. But they are not afraid. The little boy is sleeping deeply, dreaming of dancing bears and tall ships. The neighbors sit quietly, lost in the sweet memory of cherry preserves and summer walks. The soldier above keeps his silent watch under the stars. It is a quiet, beautiful resilience. The shadows have grown long, and the red twilight has faded, but in the soft, rhythmic breathing of the people hiding in the deep cellars, the light of humanity burns on, pure, gentle, and entirely unextinguished. They rest in the ruins, held safe in the dark, waiting peacefully for the dawn. When the winter sky finally emptied its heavy white heart over the broken city, it did not care whose shoulders the snow fell upon. It began in the quietest hours of the night, a slow, mesmerizing drift of pale stars falling from a vast and charcoal heaven. The snow descended with a profound, maternal gentleness, laying a cool, white hand over the fevered brow of the ruined city. Where there had been jagged, violent mountains of shattered concrete and twisted iron, the snow built soft, rolling dunes of pristine ivory. It filled the empty window frames like delicate lace curtains. It rounded the sharp, broken edges of the world, transforming a landscape of terrifying devastation into a quiet, breathless painting of silver and shadow. With the snow came a deep, insulating silence. The furious roar of the autumn had long since burned itself out, replaced now by the muffled, acoustic softness that only a heavy winter snowfall can bring. The great river, which had flowed dark and cold, was now locked entirely beneath a thick, unyielding pavement of ice. The world had stopped moving. The earth was holding its breath, wrapped in a frozen slumber so deep it felt as though the spring would never dare to return. In the very heart of this frozen stillness, a strange and terrible intimacy had taken root. The sweeping, open front lines of the summer steppes were gone. Here, and the hollowed-out shells of grand apartment buildings and the deep, buried cellars of old factories, the geography of the world was measured in inches. Two armies, exhausted beyond all human comprehension, found themselves entirely tangled together in the dark. A young man from a quiet farm in Bavaria might sit huddled against the western wall of a ruined bakery, while a boy from a snowy village in Siberia sat leaning against the eastern wall. They were separated by nothing more than a single layer of crumbling, frost-covered brick. In this haunting proximity, the concept of the enemy began to blur, softening just like the edges of the ruined city under the snow. When you are sitting only a few feet away from the people you are told to fear, you do not hear the grand, terrifying machinery of empires. You hear the fragile, undeniable sounds of simple humanity. In the dead of the freezing night, when the wind died down to a soft, mournful sigh, the silence between the walls became a bridge. A boy huddled in a dark stairwell could hear the man on the floor above him shifting his weight against the cold wooden boards. He could hear the sharp, rhythmic striking of a match, failing again and again to catch in the damp air. He could hear a low, rattling cough, a sound of deep, chest-aching sickness that required no translation. Sometimes, in the darkest, coldest hours, one of them might begin to murmur in his sleep. A soft, feverish whisper calling out for a mother in a language the boy below did not speak, but entirely understood. The tone of fear, the desperate longing for warmth, the quiet weeping of a freezing child, these are universal languages. Listening to these sounds through the cracks in the stone, a profound realization would wash over the young men in the dark. The monster on the other side of the wall was not a monster at all. He was just another boy, shivering in a thin coat, terrified of the dark, and desperately missing his home. As the deep winter tightened its grip, the biting cold became the only true, overwhelming ruler of the city. It was a frost so bitter it felt like broken glass against the skin. It did not distinguish between the colors of their uniforms. It seeped through the thickest wool, turned boots into blocks of ice, and numbed fingers until they could no longer feel the heavy steel of their weapons. The cold reduced them all to their most basic, fragile forms, freezing souls searching endlessly for a single spark of heat. And in the face of this shared, insurmountable misery, beautiful, unspoken truces began to blossom in the snow. In the center of a large, devastated courtyard, surrounded by the towering, skeletal remains of residential blocks, a deep crater had filled with water and frozen solid. It was the only source of drinking water for blocks in any direction. The ice was thick, requiring heavy blows to break through to the precious, freezing water beneath. The moon had risen full and bright, casting long, stark shadows across the white floor of the courtyard. In the deep shadow of the northern archway, a young soldier stepped out. He carried a small tin pail and an iron chisel. His breath plumed in the air in thick, white clouds. Every step he took crunched loudly in the devastating quiet. As he reached the edge of the crater, he froze. From the southern archway, a second shadow emerged, stepping out into the pale moonlight. It was a boy in a different uniform, carrying a wooden bucket. For a long, breathless moment, the two young men stood perfectly still, separated by 30 yards of open snow. They both had rifles slung across their backs. The war demanded that they raise them. But the profound, bone-deep exhaustion weighing down their shoulders demanded something else. The first boy looked at the second. He saw the way the stranger's shoulders slumped, the way his bare hands were wrapped in dirty rags to ward off the frostbite. He saw his own reflection in the stranger's hollow, tired eyes. Slowly, deliberately, the first boy lowered his hands. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The second boy let out a long, trembling breath that drifted up toward the stars. He nodded back. With agonizing slowness, the first boy knelt by the crater. He raised his iron chisel and struck the ice. A hollow, musical thwack echoed off the ruined walls. He struck it again, and again, until the dark water welled up from below. He dipped his tin pail, filling it to the brim, and carefully stood. He did not look back as he walked slowly back into the deep shadows of his archway, leaving the ice broken and ready. Only when the courtyard was entirely empty again did the second boy walk forward. He knelt in the exact spot where his enemy had just knelt. He dipped his wooden bucket into the freezing water, feeling the residual warmth of the other boy's presence lingering softly in the bitter air. He filled his bucket, stood, and walked quietly back into his own dark sanctuary. No words were spoken. No treaties were signed. It was just a fleeting, miraculous moment of grace. A fragile, beautiful understanding that they were both just thirsty men trapped in a frozen hell, and that for tonight, the simple act of drawing water was more important than the mandates of the world above them. These quiet moments of shared humanity were the secret, glowing embers hidden beneath the ash of the city. Sometimes, it was a half-smoked cigarette tossed gently across a ruined hallway, landing with a soft hiss in the snow. Sometimes, it was a small tin of stale meat pushed carefully through a hole in the plaster, a blind offering to the coughing stranger on the other side. There were microscopic acts of everyday heroism, stubborn rebellions against the hatred they were supposed to feel. Retreating deep into their respective cellars, the boys would huddle around the faint, flickering glow of makeshift oil lamps. With their fingers slowly thawing around their cups of icy water, they would reach into their breast pockets and pull out the worn, fragile tethers that connected them to the world outside the snow. A young man in the northern cellar gently unfolds a letter from his sister. The paper is soft, the ink slightly blurred from the damp. He traces the loops of her cursive, reading about the heavy snow falling on the pines behind their family farm. He imagines the smell of the wood-burning stove, the sound of the cattle shifting in the warm barn, the soft golden light spilling out of the kitchen window onto the untouched drifts. Just 50 yards away, sitting against a broken concrete pillar in the southern cellar, another young man stares at a small, creased photograph of his wife. She is standing on a wooden porch, smiling warmly, holding a thick-knit blanket around her shoulders. He closes his eyes and pictures the exact same things. The heat of a hearth fire. The comforting ticking of a mantel clock. The impossible luxury of sleeping in a bed, entirely safe, entirely warm. They are separated by a wall of stone and a world of conflict, but in the quiet dark of their minds, they are sitting beside the exact same fire. They are dreaming the exact same beautiful, simple dream of home. The night wears on, cold and silent and deep. Outside, the snow begins to fall again. The flakes drift down with that slow, hypnotic grace, covering the footprints around the frozen crater, erasing the paths that lead between the ruins. The snow blankets the shattered stone, tucking the broken city into a gentle, heavy sleep. Inside the dark cellars, the oil lamps finally burn out, one by one. The young men pull their rough wool coats up over their ears, tucking their chins to their chests, seeking the meager warmth of their own breathing. The exhaustion finally overtakes them, a heavy, velvet weight pulling them down into the dark. They sleep just yards apart, their rhythmic breathing rising and falling in perfect, unconscious unison. The wind whistles softly through the hollowed-out windows above, singing a low, mournful lullaby to all the lost children of the winter. For now, the world is perfectly still. The frost has stopped the war, leaving only the beautiful, quiet resilience of the human heart, beating softly, stubbornly, beneath the snow. There is a silence so profound, so incredibly heavy, that it rings in the ears far louder than any storm. For longer than anyone could remember, the earth had trembled without pause. The air above the great river had been torn apart by a relentless, thundering roar, a deafening tempest of a world tearing itself at the seams. And then, on a freezing, pale morning beneath a sky of bruised pearl, it simply stopped. The absence of sound did not feel like peace at first. It felt like a sudden, breathtaking vacuum. Deep within the icy, buried cellars and the dark, shattered hollows of the concrete ruins, the men waited. They sat with their shoulders braced, their eyes squeezed tightly shut, their hands pressed against their ears in anticipation of the next terrible tremor. But the tremor never came. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, they began to open their eyes in the dim light. They lowered their hands. They listened. The only sound that remained was the low, mournful sigh of the winter wind sweeping across the frozen stone. It was an eerie, overwhelming quiet. The guns had finally fallen asleep. One by one, hesitant and incredibly slow, figures began to emerge from the darkness of the earth. They stepped out into the blinding, white glare of the snow-covered rubble, lifting their hands to shield their eyes from the pale winter sun. They did not look like soldiers anymore. They were pale, hollow-eyed ghosts wrapped in filthy, soot-stained rags, dragging boots bound together with scraps of carpet and twisted wire. As they stood in the quiet light, a deep, encompassing numbness settled over them. There was no cheering. There was no grand triumph, and there was no bitter fury. There was only a heavy, exhausting realization that they were still breathing. They stood in the center of a frozen, unrecognizable wasteland, blinking at the sky, feeling the strange, hollow ache of simply being alive. The great storm had finally passed, leaving them washed up on the silent shores of a ruined world. Soon, a new rhythm replaced the chaos of the winter. It was the slow, shuffling drag of thousands of exhausted feet moving across the endless, white steppe. The great march into captivity had begun. A vast, winding ribbon of gray and brown coats stretched out across the snow, moving at a glacial, hypnotic pace toward the distant horizon. To walk in this column was to walk inside a dream. The cold was a constant, heavy blanket pressing against their chests, but they had lived with the frost for so long that it felt like a part of their own skin. The wind blew a fine, powdery snow across the ice, swirling around their ankles like a pale, freezing mist. They leaned on each other, moving as a single, weary organism. Arms were draped over shoulders, hands gripped the tattered edges of coats, pulling one another forward step by agonizing step. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking choreography of survival. If you were to look closely at the men walking beside the column, the guards holding the heavy rifles to guide the way, you would not see the faces of conquerors. You would see the exact same exhaustion. They shared the same hollow cheeks painted red by the wind, the same frostbitten fingers, the same profound, bone-deep longing for a warm hearth. Sometimes, a guard would look at the prisoner stumbling beside him, and the prisoner would lift his tired head and look back. In that brief, silent meeting of eyes, all the grand, terrible machinery of the war simply dissolved. They were not enemies in that moment. They were just boys, trapped together in the terrifying vastness of the snow, at the absolute mercy of the winter. When a man in the column stumbled and sank heavily into a snowdrift, the guard did not yell. He did not raise his weapon. He simply stopped, his own shoulders slumping with fatigue, and waited with quiet, unspoken patience as the fallen man's friends knelt in the snow and gently lifted him back to his feet. In this landscape of overwhelming gray and white, stripped of all earthly comforts, the smallest gestures became profound acts of grace. Two young men, walking side by side, shared a single pair of woolen gloves. The fabric was frayed and full of holes, but it was all they had. One wore the glove on his left hand, tucking his bare right hand deep into the fabric of his coat. The other wore the right glove, hiding his bare left hand against his chest. They walked closely together, their shoulders bumping softly with every step, keeping each other grounded, keeping each other moving. It was a silent, beautiful pact. They would carry the cold together. As the slow, winding river of men passed the outskirts of a small, shattered village, a few local women stood by the edge of the frozen road. They pulled their heavy, woven shawls tightly around their faces, protecting themselves from the biting wind. They had lost everything to this winter. Their wooden homes were burned, their pantries were completely bare, their own families scattered or lost. Yet, as they watched this broken, shivering column shuffle past their ruined fences, the anger in their hearts was quietly replaced by a welling of profound, maternal pity. An older woman, with deep, gentle lines of sorrow etched into her face, stepped slightly forward into the road. She looked at a young prisoner passing by, a boy whose face was so pale he looked as though he might vanish into the snow. He was shaking violently, his eyes fixed blankly on the boots of the man in front of him. The woman did not see an invader. She saw a child. She saw a mother's son, starving and freezing at the edge of the world. She reached deep into the pocket of her heavy apron, her worn fingers searching the coarse fabric. She pulled out a small piece of dark, hard crust, a heel of bread saved from her own meager rations. She stepped closer, reaching out through the blowing snow, and pressed the small, precious morsel silently into the boy's trembling hands. He stopped. He slowly lifted his head, his wide, dark eyes meeting hers. They filled with sudden, pooling tears that immediately froze on his eyelashes. He gave her a slow, fragile nod. She offered a soft, deeply sorrowful smile in return, folding her hands back beneath her shawl. It was a microscopic exchange. A tiny, glowing ember of pure, blinding humanity shining against a backdrop of endless dark. As the miles stretched on, and the physical toll of the march became an almost unbearable weight, the men retreated entirely into the quiet sanctuaries of their own minds. To survive the agony of the frost, they had to walk somewhere else. Deep inside his tattered tunic, pressed flat and warm against his chest, a man carried a folded letter from his wife. He had read it so many times in the pitch-black cellars that the ink had faded to a pale ghost, but the words were permanently, beautifully carved into his heart. As he put one heavy foot in front of the other, he closed his eyes to the endless white plain. He placed himself in the small, warm kitchen of his past. He imagined the bright, golden morning sunlight streaming through the window pane, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He listened for the rhythmic, comforting ticking of the old clock on the wall. He breathed in deeply, ignoring the scent of the cold, and filled his mind with the sharp, sweet smell of pine needles and damp wool drying by the iron stove. He felt the soft, familiar weight of his daughter climbing onto his knee, her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck. He wrapped this memory around his freezing body like a thick, impenetrable quilt. It brought him no sorrow, only a fierce, radiant warmth. It was his anchor. It was the invisible tether pulling him forward through the snow, reminding him of the beautiful, ordinary world that was waiting for him somewhere far away. Survival, they were learning in this silence, was not a light or joyful thing. It was a heavy, solemn burden. To simply be alive, to draw breath when so many others were resting forever beneath the frozen earth, was a quiet, crushing weight to carry. They bore the memories of their fallen friends with them, folding their names gently into the deepest, quietest corners of their hearts. Every agonizing step they took across the ice was a silent, moving testament to those they had left behind. They walked for the boys who would never write another letter home. They walked for the fathers who would never sit by their hearth fires again. They survived for them. The short, pale afternoon began its slow surrender to the evening. The vast sky deepened from a clouded gray to a soft, enveloping violet, and the first bright, piercing stars began to appear through the veil of the twilight. The wind settled into a low, steady, comforting hum. The long column finally came to a halt in the middle of an open field, surrounded by the vast, unbroken ocean of the dark steppe. The men did not pitch tents, there were none to pitch. They simply sank down exactly where they stood, curling into the deep snow like tired children. They huddled together in tight, sheltering clusters, sharing whatever meager warmth their bodies had left. They pulled their collars up high over their ears, tucking their chins against their chests to shield their faces from the night. The great storm is entirely over. The guns are sleeping under the ice. The world is profoundly, breathtakingly quiet. As the moon rises large and luminous over the horizon, it washes the sleeping camp in a pale, silver light, turning the snow into a beautiful field of glittering diamond dust. A gentle, heavy peace finally rests upon their weary shoulders. They are still here. Their hearts are still beating a slow, steady rhythm against the freezing earth. The morning will bring another long road, another day of walking toward the unknown. But for tonight, in the deep, echoing silence of the frozen wasteland, there is no fear. There is only the wind, the stars, and the soft, collective breathing of thousands of men resting in the dark. They are allowed, finally, to close their eyes, to let go of the weight of the world, and to drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. There is an ancient, quiet magic in the deep woods, a green and shadowed embrace that knows exactly how to hide the fragile things of the world. Far away from the endless, sweeping steppes and the broken, smoking ruins of the cities, the landscape changes. The open sky, so vast and terrifying in its emptiness, is gently replaced by a soaring canopy of deep green. These are the old forests. They are towering sanctuaries of ancient pine, silver birch, and massive, sprawling oaks that have stood perfectly still for centuries. They do not know about the empires clashing beyond their borders. They know only the slow, rhythmic turning of the seasons, the falling of the leaves, and the quiet blossoming of the ferns in the damp shade. To step off the dusty roads and disappear into these woods is to step out of the war and into a completely different, deeply hushed world. The roar of the outside is instantly swallowed by the dense walls of timber. The hard, frozen ground gives way to a soft, springy carpet of fallen pine needles and thick, velvet moss. Every footstep is muffled. Every sound is softened. It is a place that demands stillness, breathing a cool, fragrant air heavy with the scent of damp earth, rich resin, and wild mint. In this vast, emerald cathedral, people who have lost everything else have found a beautiful, hidden home. They do not live in houses of brick or wood, for those can be seen. Instead, they have folded themselves directly into the protective arms of the earth itself. Deep beneath the roots of the ancient trees, they have dug shallow, hidden sanctuaries. These earthen dugouts, lined with thick, fragrant boughs of spruce and pine, are completely invisible to the world above. To walk past one, you would see nothing but a gentle mound of moss and a tangle of wild blackberry bushes. But beneath that moss, there is life. Inside one of these dugouts, the air is warm and smells intensely of the forest floor. The ceiling is a beautiful, chaotic net of thick tree roots, serving as the sturdy rafters of their hidden home. A single, tiny oil lamp casts a soft, golden, flickering glow against the walls of packed brown dirt. In this gentle light, a mother sits on a bed of dry ferns and woven blankets. She is rocking a small child against her chest. Outside, the world is uncertain and dangerous, but down here, cradled by the earth, there is a profound, unshakable peace. She strokes the child's hair, her hands rough from digging but incredibly tender in their touch. She begins to sing, her voice barely a whisper, a delicate ribbon of sound weaving through the dark. She does not sing of soldiers or marching bands. She sings a lullaby about a little brown bear settling down for the winter. She sings about the snow falling softly on the branches, keeping the forest asleep and safe. The child listens to the slow, rhythmic beating of her heart, feeling the solid, comforting weight of the earth pressing in around them. It is a cocoon of absolute safety. Here, the monsters cannot find them. Here, they are entirely hidden, held fast in the loving, muddy hands of the forest. When the morning comes, it does not arrive with a bright, harsh light. It filters down through the million leaves of the canopy in soft, shimmering shafts of pale gold, illuminating dust motes that dance lazily in the quiet air. The camp slowly wakes, not to the sound of sirens, but to the cheerful, complex song of a woodland thrush. Life in the forest requires a slow, deliberate grace. The people move through the trees like shadows, stepping carefully over dry twigs, speaking only in low, murmuring tones. They have become part of the woodland, their clothes stained with the green of crushed leaves and the deep brown of the soil. In the late afternoon, an older man and a young boy are walking through a dense patch of ferns, carrying a small woven basket. They are foraging. It is a quiet, meditative task, requiring patience and a gentle eye. They search the damp ground around the trunks of the birches, sweeping away the fallen leaves to reveal small, hidden treasures. The old man points with a calloused finger, showing the boy a cluster of perfectly round, golden mushrooms pushing up through the pine needles. The boy smiles, kneeling in the soft dirt to carefully cut them free. Further along, in a small clearing where the sun manages to touch the ground, they find a patch of wild strawberries. The berries are tiny, much smaller than the ones that used to grow in their gardens, but they are incredibly crimson and burst with a sharp, overwhelming sweetness. The old man watches as the boy eats one, his eyes lighting up at the sudden, joyful taste. The old man does not eat any himself. Instead, he carefully picks the most perfect, unbruised berries and wraps them gently in a large, damp oak leaf. When they return to the hidden camp, he will take this small green parcel to a woman who has been sick with a fever, offering her a tiny, beautiful taste of the summer sun. It is a quiet, everyday heroism. In the middle of an endless struggle, the simple act of gathering a wild berry for a neighbor becomes a profound testament to the enduring sweetness of the human spirit. Not everyone in the woods is a family seeking shelter. There are also the watchers, the young men and women who guard the perimeter of this hidden world. They are the partisans, but in the quiet of the deep woods, they do not feel like an army. They feel like the silent shepherds of the forest. A young woman sits high up in the sturdy, welcoming branches of an ancient oak tree, her back pressed against the rough, warm bark. She is wrapped in a heavy gray coat that makes her look exactly like another shadow in the leaves. Her rifle rests across her lap, but her hands are relaxed, folded gently together. She is supposed to be watching the distant tree line, but the forest has a way of soothing the mind, of pulling you into its own ancient, peaceful rhythm. She listens to the wind sighing through the highest branches, a sound like a vast, breathing ocean. She watches a small, red squirrel dart across the forest floor, completely unaware of the war, busy only with the simple, urgent task of burying a single acorn. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small, smooth piece of river glass. It was given to her by her younger brother long before they had to flee their village. It is her talisman. She holds it up to the dappled light, watching the green glass glow like a tiny, captured emerald. She closes her eyes and whispers his name to the wind, a soft, fragile prayer released into the leaves. She does not know where he is, but she trusts the wind to carry her voice to him, across the rivers and the fields. She feels a deep, comforting kinship with the tree holding her. She imagines her own roots growing down through the soles of her boots, burying deep into the soil, drawing strength and patience from the quiet, enduring earth. As the day gently fades, the colors of the forest deepen. The bright greens turn to rich, velvety moss tones, and the spaces between the trees fill with a soft, smoky violet dusk. The birds sing their final, sleepy notes, settling into their hidden nests. Down in the earthen dugouts, the small fires are banked, reduced to softly glowing red embers that offer just enough warmth to chase away the evening chill. The families gather close together in the dark. There are no books to read, no radios to listen to, so they share the only things they have left, their stories. A grandfather whispers a folktale about a magical bird with feathers of fire, keeping his grandchildren spellbound in the shadows. A young couple sits shoulder to shoulder, their fingers quietly intertwined, remembering the sound of a violin playing at a summer festival, holding the memory between them like a fragile, beautiful pearl. They are surrounded by a world that has been entirely broken, yet here, in the deep, fragrant dark of the forest, they are perfectly whole. They have built a sanctuary out of dirt, pine boughs, and an unbreakable, stubborn love for one another. They have learned that even when everything else is stripped away, the earth will still offer a place to rest, the berries will still grow sweet in the clearings, and the human heart will still find a way to sing in the dark. The night fully arrives, spreading a thick, protective canopy of stars over the tops of the trees. The wind settles down into a gentle, rhythmic breathing. The watchers in the branches close their eyes for just a moment, trusting the ancient timber to hold them safe. Down in the burrows, the children fall into a deep, untroubled sleep, wrapped in wool and the scent of wild mint. The forest stands guard over them all. It is a silent, immense, and beautiful protector. It hides their footprints. It swallows their whispers. It rocks them gently in its green, sheltering arms. And as the night deepens, the sanctuary in the woods remains profoundly, perfectly still, wrapping the weary souls of the earth in a calm, unbroken, and endlessly peaceful embrace. There is a profound, suspended magic in the heavy warmth of a summer afternoon, when the entire world simply decides to hold its breath. Long before the thunder begins, there is a season of absolute, haunting stillness. The great, sweeping fields that stretch out toward the horizon are a masterpiece of the earth, an endless, rolling ocean of tall, golden green grass and wildflowers. It is a landscape painted in the softest, most vibrant colors of the warm months. The wheat stands high, bowing slightly beneath its own weight, swaying in a synchronized, hypnotic dance whenever the gentle breeze moves across the plains. Bright splashes of crimson poppies and pale blue cornflowers peek through the pale stalks, turning their delicate faces up toward the vast, untroubled sky. In this beautiful, sun-drenched wilderness, the world feels incredibly vast, yet profoundly intimate. The air is thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of dry earth, warm pollen, and crushed wild mint. It is the kind of summer day that belongs to childhood, to long afternoons spent lying on your back, watching the clouds drift by, completely unbothered by the turning of the clock. And here, hidden perfectly within this gentle, swaying ocean, thousands of men are doing exactly that. They are entirely swallowed by the tall grass. If you were to stand at the edge of the field, you would not see an army. You would see only the wind moving over the wheat. The earth has opened its green arms and hidden them away, offering a beautiful, temporary sanctuary from the world they have left behind. They are lying on the warm, dry soil, their heavy helmets set aside, their rough wool tunics unbuttoned at the collar to let the cool breeze touch their skin. There is a profound, surreal quality to this waiting. The men know what is coming. They know that somewhere, beyond the gentle curve of the earth, the opposing storm is gathering. But right now, in this single, suspended pocket of time, the war does not exist. There is only the sun, the grass, and the quiet, steady beating of their own hearts. When a man is forced to be entirely still for hours on end, his world becomes incredibly small and miraculously detailed. A young boy, his face pressed close to the warm dirt, watches with profound fascination as a single, tiny red ant navigates the treacherous, towering terrain of a broken twig. He watches the way the sunlight catches the translucent green veins of a broad leaf right beside his nose. He listens to the low, comforting, electric hum of a bumblebee drifting lazily from flower to flower. These tiny, perfect details of life, the things he would have walked right past a year ago, now hold his complete, reverent attention. In the face of the vast unknown, the simple, stubborn continuation of the natural world is a deep, soothing comfort. The earth does not care about the affairs of empires. The ant keeps working. The bee keeps gathering. The grass keeps growing. And for a few, precious hours, the young boy is allowed to just be a part of it, resting peacefully in the dirt like a deeply planted seed. A few yards away, perfectly camouflaged in the dappled shade of a wild blackberry bush, another soldier sits with his knees drawn up to his chest. Resting on his thighs is a small, battered notebook. He is holding a stub of a pencil, chewing thoughtfully on his bottom lip as he searches for the right words. He is writing a letter to a girl he left behind in a quiet, rain-washed valley far to the west. He does not write about the waiting. He does not write about the heavy, nervous flutter in his stomach. He reaches out and gently snaps the stem of a small, wild daisy. His hands are rough, calloused from weeks of digging and carrying heavy steel, but he handles the flower with the breathtaking delicacy of a watchmaker. He carefully presses the white petals flat against the page of his notebook. He writes to her about the beauty of the field. He tells her that the sky here is the exact same shade of blue as her eyes. He tells her that he is safe, that he is warm, and that he is thinking of the day they will walk together along the riverbank near her home. He folds the paper over the pressed flower, sealing the summer air, the scent of the grass, and all of his fragile, beautiful hope into a small square of paper. It is a quiet, profound act of everyday heroism, the beautiful, stubborn refusal to let the darkness shadow the thoughts of the person he loves. As the long, lazy afternoon stretches on, the heat begins to break. The fierce, golden light of the midday sun softens, melting into rich, warm shades of crushed amber and spun honey. The shadows of the tall grass begin to lengthen, stretching like long, dark fingers across the soil. The quiet in the fields is not a heavy, oppressive silence. It is a living, breathing symphony. In the cooling air, voices begin to drift out from the hidden spaces in the grass. They are soft, hushed murmurs. Friends lying shoulder to shoulder, sharing the intimate, whispered conversations that only come when the world is standing still. Two older men, farmers by trade in the years before they were given uniforms, lie flat on their backs, staring up at the changing sky. They pass a battered tin canteen back and forth. The water inside is warm, tasting faintly of metal and dust, but they drink it with slow, deliberate gratitude. They do not talk about the future. They talk about the soil. They talk about the exact right time to plant winter wheat, the satisfying weight of a well-oiled scythe in the hand, the smell of the first rain hitting a freshly plowed field. They speak of the harvest with a deep, reverent love. Lying here in the wild, untamed grass, they are just two tired men longing for the simple, beautiful dignity of a quiet life, anchored to the world by their shared memories of the peaceful earth. Slowly, gracefully, the sun dips below the edge of the world. The sky bruises into breathtaking shades of violet, indigo, and deep, velvety plum. The warm breeze dies down, replaced by a cool, still evening air that brings a sudden, refreshing relief to the men hidden in the fields. With the setting of the sun, the daytime chorus of the bees and the birds fades away, making room for the true musicians of the summer night. It begins with a single, tentative chirp. Then another answers. Within minutes, the entire ocean of grass is alive with the rhythmic, pulsating song of a million crickets. It is a mesmerizing, continuous thrum. A lullaby rising up from the very roots of the earth, filling the air with a soothing, hypnotic vibration that seems to massage the tension right out of the soldier's tired muscles. Night falls, absolute and enveloping. Above the endless plains, the sky reveals itself in all its staggering glory. Without the smoke of cities or the glare of electric lights to obscure it, the universe is a brilliant, overwhelming dome of crushed diamond dust. The Milky Way stretches across the black velvet like a pale, glowing river of light. Lying in the dark, bathed in the soft, silver glow of the starlight, a young man folds his hands across his chest. He stares straight up into the boundless sky. He traces the familiar shapes of the constellations, finding the Great Bear, finding the North Star. He smiles softly in the dark. He knows that his mother, standing in her small garden hundreds of miles away, is looking at that exact same star. He knows that his little brother, looking out the bedroom window, is seeing that exact same moon. The vast, terrifying distance between them suddenly feels incredibly small. The sky becomes a beautiful, glowing roof that covers them all, keeping them together even when they are apart. And in this profound, quiet darkness, there is another realization that washes over the fields. Just a few miles away, across the same swaying ocean of grass, another young man in a different uniform is lying on the exact same warm earth. He is listening to the exact same symphony of the crickets. He is looking up at the exact same magnificent, starry sky, thinking of his own mother, writing his own letters, hiding his own fears. In the pure, gentle darkness of the summer night, they are all exactly the same. They are just lonely, tired boys, holding their breath in the tall grass, wrapped in the profound vulnerability of simply being human. The earth does not choose sides. It offers its soft soil as a bed to anyone who is weary. The stars do not judge. They simply shine their ancient, peaceful light on all who look up. The night wears on, deep and undisturbed. The crickets continue their endless, soothing song. The dew begins to settle, cool and fragrant, touching the blades of grass and the faces of the sleeping men with a gentle, refreshing grace. They close their eyes, surrendering to the overwhelming peace of the moment. The tension in their jaws softens. Their breathing slows, falling into perfect, rhythmic harmony with the gentle rustling of the wind. They are safely tucked away in the green, living heart of the world. Time has stopped entirely. The storm is waiting, but it is not here yet. For now, there is only the beautiful, quiet sanctuary of the night, the warm embrace of the earth, and the soft, peaceful slumber of the men holding their breath, perfectly still, in the beautiful, whispering grass. There is a deep, quiet sorrow in walking away from the rising sun, leaving pieces of your own heart buried in the cold earth behind you. The great, unstoppable tide of the summer has finally turned, rolling back upon itself like a slow, exhausted wave pulling away from a foreign shore. The momentum that once carried thousands of men eastward, across the vast and beautiful steppes, has frozen entirely. Now, the heavy, woolen columns have turned their tired faces toward the west. They are walking back into the setting sun. It is a retreat, but it does not move with the sharp, chaotic energy of panic. It moves with the slow, hypnotic, devastatingly heavy rhythm of sheer endurance. To walk in this endless line is to surrender to a profound and crushing weariness. The winter has returned, settling over the landscape not with the sharp, shocking bite of the first frost, but with a thick, permanent blanket of gray clouds and endless, drifting snow. The sound of this journey is a quiet, repetitive lullaby. It is the soft, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of thousands of heavy boots breaking through the crust of the ice. It is a mesmerizing, muffled drumbeat that hums up through the soles of the feet and settles deep into the bones. The men do not speak much. It takes too much energy to form words in the freezing air, and besides, there is very little left to say. They simply lean forward, resting their chin against the collar of their heavy coats, entirely focused on the hypnotic movement of the boots belonging to the man directly in front of them. As they walk, the ancient, tireless wind of the open plain sweeps across the flat white world. It is a gentle but persistent force, carrying a fine, powdery veil of diamond-like ice. And it is this wind that performs the most beautiful, melancholy magic of the winter. When a heavy boot presses into the deep snow, it leaves a sharp, distinct imprint. A mark of a human life, a testament that someone was here, that someone struggled across this frozen sea. But the moment the boot is lifted, the wind goes to work. It swirls the loose, dry snow over the ridge of the footprint. Slowly, softly, it fills the indentation. Within minutes, the track is completely gone, smoothed over into a perfect, pristine slope of untouched white. It is an incredibly profound erasure. The earth is healing itself, closing over the wounds of their passing with a cool, indifferent grace. For the men looking back over their shoulders, the realization is a heavy, quiet ache. The landscape is refusing to hold their memory. It is as if they were never there at all. All their grand efforts, all their terrifying struggles, are simply swept away by a gentle breeze, leaving nothing but the pure, unblemished face of the winter. This erasure brings a specific, heartbreaking sorrow for the things they are forced to leave behind. At the edge of a small, quiet grove of silver birch trees, the endless column comes to a brief, shuffling halt. A young soldier steps out of the line. The snow is up to his knees, but he pushes through it, his eyes fixed on a small, subtle mound at the base of the largest tree. Buried beneath the fresh drift is a simple cross made of two branches bound together with a piece of frayed wire. It is a marker for a friend. A boy he shared a trench with, a boy who had split his last piece of stale bread with him only a month ago. The young soldier kneels in the deep snow, ignoring the cold that immediately seeps through his trousers. He reaches out with a thick, woolen mitten and gently brushes the frost away from the wood. He cannot take his friend home. He cannot carry him back across the thousands of miles of frozen earth. He must leave him here, in this beautiful, lonely grove, to be watched over by the quiet trees. The soldier takes off his mitten, exposing his bare hand to the biting air, and rests his palm flat against the cold bark of the birch. He bows his head and whispers a soft, fragile promise into the wind. He promises to remember the boy's laugh. He promises to tell the boy's mother how brave he was. He promises to carry the weight of his friend's unlived life inside his own heart. He puts his mitten back on, stands, and slowly trudges back to the waiting column. When he reaches his place in the line, he turns and looks back one last time. The wind is already rushing through the trees, swirling the snow around the base of the birch. The tracks he made walking to the grave are softening, fading, blurring into the white. The forest is taking his friend back, hiding him away safely in the deep, peaceful quiet of the earth. The soldier turns his face to the west, takes a deep breath, and steps forward. As the pale afternoon light begins to fail, the sky bruises into soft, mournful shades of indigo and dark slate. The wind picks up, whistling a low, lonely tune across the flatlands. Ahead, emerging like fragile charcoal sketches against the darkening sky, are the remnants of a village. To walk through a place that was once a home, and is now only a shell, is to walk among ghosts. The column breaks apart, the men shuffling off the road to seek whatever shelter the ruins can offer for the night. The village is entirely silent. There is no warm, golden light spilling from the windows. There is no cheerful smoke rising from the chimneys. The wooden fences are splintered, and the roofs have been torn open to the sky. A small group of exhausted men step through the empty doorway of what used to be a baker's house. The heavy ceramic stove in the center of the room is cracked right down the middle, its belly full of old, cold ash. The men shrug off their heavy packs, their shoulders aching with relief, and slump down onto the frozen floorboards. The stone walls, though broken, offer a precious, beautiful sanctuary from the biting wind outside. In the dim, fading twilight, a young boy with frostbitten cheeks is gathering scattered pieces of broken chair wood to build a small fire. As he sweeps his hand through a pile of fallen plaster and snow in the corner of the room, his fingers brush against something soft. He pauses, pulling the object out from the debris. It is a small, knitted child's mitten. It is a bright, cheerful shade of cherry red, completely out of place in this gray and white world. The boy holds it up, brushing the dirt from the woolen thumb. He stares at the small, empty shape. He imagines the little hand that used to wear it. He thinks of a mother sitting by this very stove, her needles clicking softly in the evening, knitting this bright red wool to keep her child warm. A profound, heavy wave of tenderness washes over him. He does not throw the mitten back into the rubble. He stands up, his joints popping in the cold, and walks over to the window ledge. He carefully, reverently places the little red mitten on the sill, smoothing out the fabric. It is a tiny, beautiful act of respect. A quiet, unspoken apology to the ghosts of the house, an acknowledgement that this place was loved, that it mattered, and that the warmth that once lived here is not entirely forgotten. The men build their small fire inside the ruined stove. The flames are weak, casting a pale, flickering orange light across their exhausted faces, but the meager heat is a miraculous comfort. They sit close together, their knees nearly touching, passing a canteen of tepid, melted snow back and forth. One of the men unbuttons his thick coat and reaches into his breast pocket. He pulls out a small, battered notebook and a stub of pencil. He holds the notebook close to the fire, using the dim light to see the pages. He is writing a letter. He has no idea if there will ever be a mail train, or if this piece of paper will ever leave his pocket, but the simple act of writing is a lifeline. He writes about the sunset. He tells his wife that for the first time in over a year, he is walking toward the setting sun. He tells her that every step he takes, no matter how heavy, is a step closer to their front door. He does not write about the graves in the birch groves, or the empty, roofless houses. He writes about his hope. He writes that he is looking at the stars through the broken roof, and pretending that they are the lanterns lighting the long, dark road back to her. As the night deepens, the fire burns down to soft, glowing red embers. The men pull their collars up around their ears, huddling together for shared warmth, and finally let their heavy eyelids close. The physical agony of the day recedes, replaced by the deep, merciful numbness of sleep. Outside, the snow begins to fall again in earnest. It drifts down in large, heavy flakes, entirely silent, covering the sleeping village in a fresh coat of perfect white. It falls on the road they just traveled. It fills the deep ruts left by their boots and the heavy wheels of their carts. The wind sighs through the empty window frames, a gentle, sweeping lullaby that carries no anger, only the vast, indifferent peace of the winter. The retreat is a sorrowful journey, a slow unwinding of everything that was done. But in the quiet dark, wrapped in the ruins of the world, there is a strange and beautiful comfort. The earth is taking it all back. The footprints are gone. The scars on the fields are hidden. The men are resting safely in the shadows, moving slowly, day by day, back toward the lives they left behind. The road is incredibly long, and the winter is deeply cold, but the wind is at their backs, and the stars are showing them the way home. To stand at the edge of a great, dark river in the very dead of night is to feel as though you have reached the edge of the universe itself. The mighty water does not care about the affairs of the men who gather on its sandy banks. It is an ancient, living thing, flowing with a slow, heavy power that has carved its way through the earth for thousands of years. Tonight, under a vast and moonless sky, the river looks like a limitless ribbon of black glass. It reflects the brilliant, piercing scatter of the stars above, turning the surface into a mesmerizing, shifting map of the heavens. It is beautiful, and it is overwhelmingly vast. Hidden among the tall, swaying reeds that line the eastern shore, thousands of men are waiting in the absolute dark. The night air is damp and bitterly cold, carrying the deep, earthy scent of wet stone, crushed river weed, and ancient mud. The men are entirely silent. They have been stripped of all their noise, all their heavy, marching rhythms. Here, in the shadow of the water, silence is the only thing that will keep them safe. You can feel the tension in the air, a quiet, collective holding of breath. The men sit with their knees drawn to their chests, their rough woolen coats pulled tightly around their shoulders. They look out across the black expanse, trying to find the opposite shore, but the darkness simply swallows their gaze. For boys who grew up walking on solid ground, surrounded by the comforting walls of deep forests or the rolling hills of the farmland, the sheer, flat emptiness of the open water is a terrifying mystery. It is a deep, uncrossable void that they must somehow cross. Slowly, with the agonizing care of ghosts moving through a graveyard, they begin to step down into the shallows. There are no grand ships waiting for them. There are only small, fragile wooden fishing boats, their paint peeling, smelling of old pine and dried nets. Where there are no boats, there are makeshift rafts constructed from lashed branches and empty oil drums. As the men step onto the wood, the small vessels rock and dip violently beneath their weight. The dark water laps hungrily at the edges, a soft, rhythmic hiss that sounds like the river is whispering to them in the dark. A young soldier, barely old enough to need a razor, finds his place on a narrow, splintered wooden bench. His hands grip the edges of the wood so tightly that his knuckles glow white in the starlight. He can feel the terrifying, shifting balance of the boat beneath him. He is wearing heavy leather boots, a thick wool tunic, and an ammunition belt that feels as though it weighs 100 pounds. He knows, with a quiet, sickening certainty, that if the boat tips, if he falls into that freezing, black water, he will sink like a stone. He squeezes his eyes shut, refusing to look at the water inches below his boots. He slows his breathing, inhaling the damp night air, and desperately searches his mind for an anchor. He finds it in a memory from his childhood. He remembers a small, sunlit creek that ran behind his grandfather's house. He remembers the water there being entirely clear, rushing over smooth, golden pebbles. He remembers rolling up his trousers and wading into the stream, the water barely reaching his calves, cool and inviting on a hot summer afternoon. He clings to that memory, wrapping it around his frightened heart like a shield. He tells himself that this vast, terrifying river is just water, just like the creek. It is only water. The boat pushes off from the shore, slipping free of the reeds with a soft, rustling sigh. The crossing begins. There is no roar of engines. There is only the incredibly slow, incredibly quiet sound of wooden oars dipping into the black water. Dip, pull, drip. Dip, pull, drip. The drops of water falling from the lifted oars sound like heavy pearls hitting the surface of a glass mirror. The men are suspended in the void, caught halfway between the shore they have left and the shore they cannot see. The velvet night wraps around them, absolute and isolating. In the center of the river, the current is incredibly strong. It pulls at the fragile wooden boats with an invisible, muscular hand, threatening to sweep them away into the endless dark. The air here is colder, biting at their exposed cheeks and numbing their lips. A fine, freezing mist rises from the surface, settling on their eyelashes and dampening the wool of their collars. Sitting in the belly of a makeshift raft, surrounded by men he can only see as dark silhouettes, an older soldier reaches slowly into the breast pocket of his coat. His fingers are stiff with the cold, but they gently trace the outline of a folded piece of paper hidden beneath the coarse wool. It is a letter from his wife, carrying the faint, lingering scent of lavender soap. He presses his hand flat against his chest, keeping the paper close to his beating heart. In the profound silence of the mid-river, he begins to whisper a prayer. He does not pray for the ruin of his enemies. He does not pray for glory or medals. He prays only to the current. He whispers to the dark water, asking it to be merciful, asking it to let him pass. He prays that the wood holds together just a little longer. He prays that he will be allowed to walk through his own front door one more time, to see the warm light of the kitchen, to feel the soft, familiar weight of his wife's hand in his. His prayer joins 1,000 other silent pleas rising up from the dark boats, floating like invisible mist toward the indifferent stars. The fear in the boats is a living, breathing presence, but so is the quiet, magnificent solidarity of the men. The young boy on the wooden bench shivers violently, a cold tear slipping down his cheek and falling into the dark water. The man sitting beside him, a stranger whose name he does not even know, senses the boy's terror. In the pitch black, the older man reaches out his hand. He finds the boy's trembling shoulder and rests his heavy, calloused palm against it. He does not say a word. To speak would be to break the silence that keeps them alive. But that firm, gentle pressure speaks volumes. It says, I am here. You are not alone in the dark. We will carry this fear together. The boy leans ever so slightly into the touch, drawing an immense, profound strength from the simple warmth of another human being. The trembling in his shoulders begins to ease. He opens his eyes and looks up at the sky, letting the pale, silver light of the stars wash over his face. For what feels like a lifetime, they drift through the abyss. The rhythm of the oars continues, a steady, hypnotic heartbeat in the chest of the night. And then, a new shadow begins to form against the blackness. It is deeper, more solid than the night sky. The outline of the western shore begins to rise up from the water, a dark, looming bank of earth and tangled roots. The sight of it sends a jolt of pure, electrifying hope through the exhausted men. The oars pull with a sudden, renewed desperation. The boats glide through the final stretch of open water, breaking through a thick curtain of overhanging willow branches. With a soft, heavy, miraculous thud, the wooden hull of the first boat strikes the muddy bank. It is the most beautiful sound in the world. The men do not wait for orders. They scramble over the sides of the boats, splashing into the freezing shallows. They do not care about the cold water soaking their trousers. They do not care about the sharp rocks hiding beneath the surface. They simply lunge for the shore. They throw themselves onto the muddy bank, their hands digging desperately into the soft, wet earth. They cling to the exposed roots of the trees like shipwrecked sailors clinging to a lifeline. They pull themselves up out of the water, dragging their heavy, exhausted bodies onto the solid ground. When they reach the top of the bank, hidden safely in the dense, dark undergrowth, the relief that washes over them is entirely overwhelming. It is a physical weight lifting from their chests, leaving them gasping for the cool night air. Men collapse into the mud, burying their faces in the soft, fragrant earth. They breathe in the scent of the soil, the crushed leaves, the beautiful, undeniably solid ground. For a boy who just spent an eternity suspended over a freezing, bottomless void, the cold, wet mud is the most comforting bed he has ever known. In the dark, shoulders heave with silent, ragged sobs. The tears that they held back in the boats finally break free, hot and fast, mixing with the cold river water dripping from their faces. They are tears of profound, indescribable gratitude. They are alive. They have crossed the dark water. The soldier with the letter in his pocket lies on his back in the tall weeds, his chest rising and falling in deep, shuddering breaths. He looks up through the canopy of the trees at the stars shining above. He places his hand over his pocket once more, feeling a quiet, glowing warmth spreading through his entire body. He is one step closer to home. The young boy sits up, wiping his face with the back of his muddy sleeve. He looks toward the man who held his shoulder in the boat, and in the faint starlight, they share a single, exhausted nod of understanding. A quiet, unbreakable bond forged over the deep water. The crossing is over. The great, dark river flows on behind them, silent and indifferent, carrying the secrets of the night away toward the sea. But on this side of the water, tucked safely into the roots and the earth, the men are finally allowed to rest. They pull their wet coats tightly around themselves, finding warmth in the simple fact of their own survival. They close their eyes, listening to the wind sighing gently through the willows, and surrender to a deep, peaceful sleep, held fast in the sturdy, unbreakable embrace of the muddy shore. Sometimes, the heaviest burden a human heart can carry is the simple, agonizing weight of having to stand perfectly still. The great, wide river flows with a slow, heavy grace, entirely indifferent to the history breaking upon its banks. Its dark waters move in a quiet, hypnotic rhythm, carrying the cold currents from the deep mountains down toward the distant, unseen sea. On the eastern shore, where the sandy banks meet the tall, swaying reeds, an immense and profound stillness has settled over the weary men who have marched so far to reach this water. They have finally stopped walking. But the rest they have found here is not a peaceful one. It is a heavy, sorrowful pause, filled with the devastating ache of an unending wait. Across the dark expanse of the water, the horizon is completely obscured. The ancient, beautiful city that sits on the western bank is hidden behind a massive, unnatural veil. It is not the soft, white fog of the coming autumn. It is a thick, bruised haze of deep charcoal, slate gray, and mournful, bruised violet. The city is burning. And yet, from this distance, across the wide, insulating barrier of the river, the destruction is eerily, hauntingly silent. The grand, terrifying noises of the world falling apart are muffled by the wind and the water, reduced to nothing more than a faint, distant murmuring, like the low rumble of a thunderstorm that is trapped far away behind the hills. Because they cannot hear the tragedy, the men are forced to simply watch it. And in that watching, a deep, overwhelming sorrow takes root in their chests. The wind, blowing gently from the west, carries the sorrow directly to them. It sweeps across the water, bringing with it a fine, drifting snow. But it is not cold. It is warm, and it is entirely gray. It is the ash of the city. A young soldier sits cross-legged in the soft sand, his rifle resting forgotten by his side. He is entirely still, his tired eyes fixed on the hazy skyline. He reaches out a rough, calloused hand, holding his palm flat against the gentle breeze. A single, delicate flake of ash drifts down from the sky. It dances in the air for a moment, spinning with a fragile, tragic grace, before finally coming to rest on the center of his palm. He looks at it closely. It is weightless, a microscopic ghost of something that used to be whole. As he stares at the tiny gray smudge, his mind begins to wander, seeking the human truth hidden within the dust. He wonders, with a quiet, breaking heart, what this ash used to be. Was it a piece of a wooden cradle, lovingly carved by a father's hands? Was it the page of a favorite book, read by a window on a rainy Sunday afternoon? Was it the linen tablecloth of a family's dining room, where laughter and warm bread were shared just a few short weeks ago? He gently closes his fingers around the ash, as if trying to protect the memory of a stranger's life. He feels a profound, deeply personal grief for the unseen people across the water. He knows exactly how precious a home is. He knows the exact, beautiful weight of ordinary life. To sit here on the quiet bank, entirely safe in the tall grass, while a city turns to dust just out of reach, fills him with a quiet, devastating helplessness. All up and down the eastern shore, thousands of men are sharing this exact same vigil. They are an army halted in its tracks, ordered to simply wait while the pages of history turn without them. The hardest thing for a person to do is to watch another human being suffer and be entirely unable to reach out a hand to help. The soldiers sit in the reeds, they lean against the trunks of the willow trees, they lie back in the dry dirt, wrapped in a heavy blanket of empathy. They do not talk about the grand, sweeping strategies of empires. They do not care about the invisible lines drawn on maps by men in distant, comfortable rooms. They only care about the mothers, the fathers, the children hiding in the dark, suffocating cellars across the river. Beneath the sweeping branches of an ancient oak tree, two men sit shoulder to shoulder. The air is cooling as the afternoon begins to wane, and the golden hour is swallowed entirely by the smoke, turning the sunlight into a pale, eerie amber. The older of the two men holds a small, battered tin cup. Inside, he has steeped a few pine needles in warm water, creating a meager, bitter tea. He takes a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest, and then gently passes the cup to the younger boy sitting beside him. The boy takes the cup with both hands, letting the warm metal thaw his stiff fingers. He is staring blankly across the water, his face illuminated by the strange, orange glow of the hazy sky. He reaches into his tunic and pulls out a small, frayed photograph. He holds it in his lap. It is a picture of his own mother and his younger sister, standing in front of their small wooden gate. "They are just like us," the boy whispers, his voice trembling slightly, breaking the immense quiet of the riverbank. He does not look away from the water. "The people over there. They just wanted to sweep their floors. They just wanted to sit in the sun. They are just like my mother." The older man does not offer any hollow comforts. He does not try to explain the unforgiving, mechanical gears of the world. He simply reaches out and rests his heavy, warm hand on the back of the boy's neck. It is a gesture of absolute understanding. "I know," the older man murmurs softly. "I know they are. It is the greatest tragedy of the earth. To be a gentle thing, caught in a place where the giants have decided to walk." They sit together in the fading light, sharing the bitter tea and the heavy silence. They hold a quiet, sacred mourning for the innocent people caught in the crushing, merciless space between empires. They mourn for the beautiful, doomed city that is slowly disappearing before their eyes. In their shared grief, the soldiers find a profound, invisible connection to the strangers across the water. They cannot cross the river to save them, but they can honor them. They can hold them gently in their thoughts. They can refuse to look away. As the evening approaches, the wind dies down, and the surface of the Vistula becomes as smooth as dark, polished glass. The gray sky slowly transitions into the deep, enveloping blue of the night. But the horizon does not go dark. As the sun sets, the true, terrible glow of the burning city reveals itself. The smoke is underlit by a massive, deep red fire, turning the clouds into a glowing sea of crushed ruby and dark copper. It is a terrifying sight, yet, from the absolute quiet of the eastern bank, it possesses a strange, mournful beauty. It looks like a massive, glowing hearth fire, burning out of control at the very edge of the world. The reflection of the flames dances across the black water, reaching out toward the soldiers on the shore like long, trembling fingers of light. The men pull their thick woolen coats tighter around their shoulders, seeking whatever warmth they can find in the cooling night air. They lie down in the soft sand, using their heavy canvas packs as pillows. They close their tired eyes, but the red glow of the city still registers against their eyelids, a constant, glowing reminder of the tragedy unfolding just a mile away. To pass the time in the dark, a soldier lying near the water's edge begins to hum a very soft, very slow melody. It is an old, simple folk song, a lullaby about a bird that has lost its nest in a summer storm. The notes are incredibly fragile, floating up into the smoky air, weaving their way into the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the river against the shore. The man next to him hears the melody and slowly, quietly, begins to hum along. Then another voice joins, and another, until a soft, harmonious chorus rises from the reeds. It is not a song of victory. It is a song of pure, distilled sorrow. It is a sonic blanket, woven from empathy and exhaustion, cast out over the water in a desperate, beautiful attempt to soothe the suffering they cannot touch. They sing for the children in the cellars. They sing for the grand, ancient buildings crumbling into dust. They sing for the sheer, heartbreaking fragility of a peaceful life. The river flows on, carrying their soft humming down toward the sea. The ashes continue to fall, drifting down like dark, warm snow, dusting the soldiers' coats, their sleeping faces, the blades of the tall grass. It is a baptism of dust. The men accept it quietly, letting the remnants of the city settle over them, sharing the weight of the ashes as a quiet badge of shared humanity. The night deepens, wrapping the world in its vast, velvet embrace. The humming slowly fades away as the men, exhausted by the profound emotional toll of their helplessness, finally begin to surrender to sleep. The physical demand of the waiting has drained them entirely. Their breathing slows, falling into a deep, rhythmic cadence that matches the slow heartbeat of the earth. Even in their sleep, they do not turn their backs on the river. They lie facing the water, facing the glowing red horizon, standing a silent, unconscious guard over the tragedy. They are ordinary men, caught in the terrifying, sweeping currents of history, anchored to the shore by orders they cannot break. But within their hearts, they are entirely free to love, to mourn, and to feel the deep, abiding connection that binds all human souls together in the dark. The wind whispers through the willow branches, a soft, eternal sigh. The water laps gently against the mud. The ashes fall quietly through the night. The men sleep by the river, holding the sorrow of the world gently in their tired hands, finding a quiet, enduring peace in the profound, unbreakable grace of simply caring for those they cannot save. When the shadows grow long enough to touch the exact place where a journey began, the heavy heart knows that the end is finally drawing near. The winter sky hangs low and pale, an endless expanse of soft, clouded pearl that seems to quiet the entire world. The fierce, biting winds of the open steppes have softened into a gentle, mournful breeze as the landscape slowly begins to change. The vast, empty plains surrender to rolling hills, dense, dark forests of ancient pine, and the familiar, quiet geometry of small farming villages. There is no grand line painted on the earth, no towering gate to mark the crossing, but the air itself feels different. A profound, unspoken realization settles over the endless, winding columns of weary men. They have crossed the border. They are walking into Germany. The long, dark circle is closing. The terrible tide that rolled eastward all those years ago is finally washing back onto its own shores. But there is no roaring triumph in this return. There is no parade of conquerors marching with their heads held high. The men who cross this invisible line are so deeply, bone-achingly exhausted that the very concept of victory has lost its meaning. They are simply hollow-eyed boys wrapped in frayed wool, putting one heavy boot in front of the other, driven only by the desperate, blinding hope that when this road finally ends, they will be allowed to sleep. As the short winter afternoon begins to fade, the light turns a beautiful, bruised shade of violet. The shadows stretch long and thin across the snow-covered fields, falling backward, pointing toward the east, toward the thousands of miles of frozen earth they have left behind. In this gentle, dimming light, the roads leading west are not empty. They are choked with a slow, agonizingly quiet river of humanity. It is a mirror image of the summer dust and the fleeing crowds from the very beginning of the war, but now, the world is locked in ice. Thousands of civilians, families, grandparents, young mothers, and frightened children are moving away from the approaching front, their heads bowed against the falling snow. To watch this endless procession is to witness the absolute, heartbreaking exhaustion of the human spirit. The only sound is the rhythmic, muffled crunch of boots and wooden clogs pressing into the packed snow, accompanied by the slow, mournful creaking of wooden cart wheels. These carts are piled high with the fragile remnants of ordinary lives. A feathered mattress, a heavy woolen blanket, a ceramic clock, a framed photograph. They are pulled by tired horses whose breath plumes in the freezing air, or, more often, by the people themselves, their shoulders harnessed to the heavy wooden shafts, leaning their entire weight forward just to keep the wheels turning. They are bundled in so many layers of dark coats, shawls, and scarves that they look like a migration of gentle, slow-moving shadows. The cold is a constant, heavy companion, pressing against their cheeks and numbing their fingers, but they do not complain. They simply endure. In the center of this quiet, moving river, a grandmother walks beside a small, wooden sled. Resting on the sled, wrapped tightly in a thick quilt of faded blue and yellow squares, is her young grandson. He is asleep, his face pale and entirely peaceful in the fading light. The grandmother's hands, wrapped in torn woolen mittens, grip the rope of the sled with a fierce, unbreakable determination. She is so tired that her knees tremble with every step, but she does not stop. Every few minutes, she pauses just long enough to turn and check on the boy. She reaches out with a stiff hand and gently pulls the edge of the quilt up over his cold nose, tucking him securely into his moving bed. She whispers a soft, soothing reassurance into the wind, a promise that they will find a warm place soon, a promise that the dark woods will not hurt them. It is a beautiful, quiet moment of everyday heroism. In the midst of an empire's collapse, her entire universe is reduced to the simple, profound task of keeping one small child warm in the snow. Walking along the edges of the road, moving in the opposite direction or sometimes sweeping past them, are the advancing soldiers. They are supposed to be the hunters, the final wave of a victorious army. But as they look at the fleeing families, the anger and the fury of the war seem to evaporate into the freezing air, replaced by a deep, heavy sorrow. A young soldier, his face smeared with soot and his eyes shadowed by months of unbroken tension, steps off the frozen road to let a struggling family cart pass by. He leans his heavy back against the rough bark of a pine tree, letting his rifle slip down to rest in the snow. He watches the civilians shuffle past in the twilight. He does not see enemies. He sees the exact reflection of his own memories. He looks at an old man limping along with a cane, and he sees his own grandfather tending to the apple trees in his garden. He looks at a mother holding a crying infant to her chest, and he remembers his own sister singing lullabies in their quiet kitchen. The absolute, devastating tragedy of the world washes over him. He realizes that everyone, no matter what language they speak or what coat they wear, is caught in the exact same terrifying storm. The people on this road are just as tired, just as cold, and just as frightened as he is. He reaches a trembling hand into the deep pocket of his heavy coat. His fingers brush past an empty brass casing and a piece of stale, hard bread, finally closing around a small, folded letter. It is from his mother, written months ago, the paper worn soft as fabric from being held so many times in the dark. He does not need to unfold it to read the words. He knows that she is asking if he is wearing his thick socks. He knows she is telling him that the roof has been patched for the winter. He knows she is simply waiting for him to come home. He closes his eyes, resting the back of his head against the cold bark of the tree. A profound, overwhelming wave of homesickness crashes over him. It is an ache so deep it feels like a physical weight resting on his chest. He does not want to march anymore. He does not want to carry the heavy steel. He just wants to take off his damp, freezing boots. He wants to lie down in a real bed, with clean, white sheets, and pull a heavy quilt up to his chin. He wants to close his eyes and know, with absolute certainty, that he will not be woken by the sound of thunder in the distance. He just wants to sleep. The soldiers and the civilians pass each other in the winter dusk like two separate streams of water joining in a quiet, dark river. There is no violence here on this lonely stretch of road. There is only a mutual, unspoken understanding of absolute fatigue. Sometimes, a soldier will reach out a gloved hand to steady a cart that is slipping on a patch of ice. Sometimes, a civilian will offer a brief, timid nod of gratitude before pulling their scarf tighter and continuing into the dark. They are all simply ghosts wandering through the snow, waiting for the long night to finally end. As the twilight deepens into night, the snow begins to fall with a renewed, gentle intensity. Large, delicate flakes drift down from the invisible sky, spinning slowly in the quiet air. The snow lands softly on the shoulders of the gray coats, on the woven shawls of the grandmothers, on the canvas tops of the wooden carts. It covers the tracks in the mud, turning the road into a smooth, pristine ribbon of white. The silence of the falling snow is deeply soothing. It muffles the sound of the creaking wheels and the shuffling boots, wrapping the entire world in a thick, acoustic blanket. The wind dies down completely, leaving the forest entirely still. Eventually, the great, weary columns simply cannot take another step. The movement on the road slows, and then, one by one, the carts pull off into the shelter of the trees. The soldiers, too, find their resting places among the ruins of old barns or in the deep, protective shadows of the pine groves. Small, careful fires are lit, their tiny orange flames flickering like fragile stars against the immense blackness of the woods. The fleeing families huddle together around the embers, sharing whatever small pieces of bread or hardened cheese they have left. The grandmothers hum soft, wordless lullabies to the children, rocking them gently in their arms. The soldiers sit in their own quiet circles, holding their hands out to the warmth, entirely silent, their eyes heavy and glazed with fatigue. They are all sharing the exact same night. They are all breathing the exact same cold, pine-scented air. The war has pushed them all to the very absolute edge of their endurance, stripping away everything but the barest, most beautiful essence of their humanity. The sky above the canopy of the trees clears just enough to reveal a scattering of pale, piercing stars. They shine down with a cold, indifferent grace, watching over the sleeping earth. The young soldier leaning against the tree finally slides down into the snow, wrapping his heavy coat tightly around his knees. He holds his mother's letter against his chest, right over his beating heart. He takes a long, slow breath, inhaling the clean, pure scent of the winter woods. He lets it out in a soft, white cloud of vapor. The shadows have fallen backward as far as they can go. The journey is almost over. The long, terrifying storm is finally running out of breath. He closes his eyes. The tension that has lived in his jaw for years begins, ever so slowly, to unclench. The heavy, comforting weight of exhaustion pulls him down into the dark. Around him, the forest is entirely peaceful. The families are sleeping. The soldiers are resting. The snow continues its gentle, rhythmic descent, a soft, hushed lullaby covering the tired world, inviting everyone, at long last, to simply let go, to find their sanctuary in the quiet dark, and to dream of a morning without shadows. When the sky finally falls, the frightened heart seeks the deep, quiet embrace of the earth. Above the pavement, the world is ending. The grand, historic avenues of the capital, once lined with towering linden trees and bustling with the bright, cheerful noise of a modern age, have been surrendered to a relentless, roaring storm. The air up there is thick with the heavy, choking dust of shattered stone and the bitter scent of smoke. But down here, beneath the concrete and the cobblestones, an entirely different world has taken shape. Down the long, sweeping staircases, past the iron gates and into the deep, curving tunnels of the underground railway, the people of the city have retreated into the shadows. The trains have long since stopped running. The polished steel tracks, which once carried thousands of commuters homeward in the evening dusk, now lie perfectly still, resting like two silver threads in the dark. The vaulted ceilings, lined with pale, glossy tiles, curve overhead like the ribcage of a massive, slumbering whale, offering a cool, echoing sanctuary from the fire above. To step into these tunnels is to step into a vast, whispering sea of humanity. The platforms are entirely covered with the fragile, makeshift camps of the displaced. There are no walls here, no private rooms to hide behind. The barriers of class, of neighborhood, of history, have all dissolved into the cool, damp air. They are all simply people in the dark, sitting shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in heavy wool coats, sharing the exact same breathing space, the exact same quiet terror, and the exact same desperate, stubborn hope. The darkness in the underground is not absolute, but it is heavy. The grand electric chandeliers are dead. The only illumination comes from a scattered handful of small, trembling candles and the faint, weak glow of battery-powered lamps. These tiny islands of light cast long, dancing shadows against the curved, tiled walls. They bathe the faces of the waiting people in a soft, warm, amber glow, softening the deep lines of exhaustion and washing away the gray dust that coats their skin. In this dim, echoing cavern, the noise of the war is reduced to a dull, rhythmic thudding. Every now and then, the earth itself trembles, a deep, vibrating shudder that sends a fine mist of plaster dust drifting down from the ceiling like a gentle, indoor snow. When the ground shakes, the people do not scream. They simply close their eyes, pull their knees a little tighter to their chests, and hold their breath, waiting for the vibration to pass. But beneath that intermittent, distant rumble, there is another sound. It is the true song of the underground. It is the sound of 10,000 hushed whispers. Because the space is so vast and the tiles are so hard, every sound echoes, blending together into a continuous, low, rushing murmur. It sounds like the gentle lapping of a calm ocean against a rocky shore. It is the sound of mothers soothing their children. It is the sound of old men quietly reciting ancient, comforting prayers. It is the sound of strangers sharing the profound, intimate comforts that can only be found at the very end of the world. Sitting on the very edge of the platform, her legs dangling over the silent tracks, a young woman holds a small, swaddled bundle against her chest. Her baby is restless, fussing softly in the damp, close air. The mother is so incredibly tired that she can barely keep her own eyes open, but she rocks her body back and forth in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. She leans her cheek against the top of the baby's head and begins to whisper a story. She does not tell a story about the city. She tells a story about a vast, green meadow, bathed in the warm, golden light of a summer afternoon. She describes the way the tall grass sways in the wind. She describes the bright, cheerful yellow of the buttercups, and the soft, white clouds drifting lazily across a brilliant blue sky. She pours every ounce of her remaining strength into the gentle cadence of her voice, painting a picture of perfect, unbothered peace. Beside her, a woman she has never met before leans over. This stranger is an older woman, her hair gray and pinned back, her clothes smelling faintly of mothballs and old lavender. The older woman does not say a word. She simply reaches into her deep pocket and pulls out a single, beautifully preserved dried apricot. It is a tiny jewel of sweetness, saved for an unimaginable emergency. She places it gently into the young mother's hand and folds her fingers over it. The young mother looks at the fruit, and then at the stranger. Her eyes fill with tears that she cannot blink away. She nods, a silent, profound thank you, and takes a tiny, careful bite, letting the bright, sun-drenched taste of the fruit wash over her tired tongue. It is a microscopic moment of grace, a quiet, beautiful reminder that even in the deepest, darkest tunnels of the earth, the sweetness of human kindness can still bloom. Further down the platform, nestled between a heavy leather suitcase and a concrete pillar, a young soldier sits with his head bowed. He is wearing a uniform that is torn and heavily stained with the ash of the streets above. His helmet is gone. His hands are empty. He is no longer a fighter. He is simply a boy who has retreated into the earth, entirely spent, hollowed out by the sheer, overwhelming weight of the collapsing world. He is shivering, a deep, internal tremor that he cannot control. Next to him sits an elderly man in a faded, threadbare suit. The old man watches the boy shake. He knows that the cold the boy is feeling has nothing to do with the temperature of the air. It is the cold of absolute exhaustion. It is the cold of a spirit that has run out of fuel. The old man slowly unbuttons his own heavy winter overcoat. He slips it off his narrow shoulders, leaving himself in only his suit jacket. With a gentle, deliberate movement, he drapes the heavy wool coat over the trembling shoulders of the young soldier. The boy flinches slightly at the unexpected touch, lifting his head. His eyes are wide, dark, and filled with a profound, unspoken sorrow. He looks at the old man, preparing to protest, to offer the coat back. But the old man simply shakes his head. He reaches out and pats the boy's knee with a warm, steady hand. "Rest," the old man whispers, his voice as soft as dry leaves. "You have carried enough. Just rest now." The soldier closes his eyes. He pulls the edges of the oversized coat tightly around himself, burying his face in the collar. It smells like old tobacco and peppermint. It smells like a grandfather. The trembling begins to slow, melting away under the comforting, heavy weight of the wool and the quiet, paternal permission to simply stop fighting. He leans his head back against the cold concrete pillar and, for the first time in weeks, allows himself to slide into a deep, dreamless sleep. In the flickering shadows of the underground, the concept of time begins to fade. There is no morning, no noon, no evening. There is only the constant, echoing twilight of the tunnels. To pass the uncounted hours, the people turn to the small, fragile things they carried with them into the dark. A teenage girl sits cross-legged on a woven blanket, her back pressed against the curved tiles of the wall. She is holding a small, silver locket. She clicks it open, leaning close to the weak light of a nearby lantern to see the photograph inside. It is a picture of her older brother, taken before he left for the East. She traces his smiling face with her thumb. She whispers to him, a one-sided conversation carried out in the absolute privacy of the crowded room. She tells him that she is being brave. She tells him that she saved his favorite book from the shelf before they had to leave the apartment. She tells him that she misses the way he used to play the piano in the parlor on Sunday mornings. She holds the locket against her cheek, feeling the cool metal warm against her skin, and finds a deep, sustaining comfort in the quiet, unbreakable bond of her love. Everywhere you look in this subterranean sanctuary, there are small, quiet rebellions against the despair. People are sharing water from dented tin canteens, carefully measuring out the precious drops so that everyone gets a sip. They are ripping their own clean bandages to wrap the blistered feet of their neighbors. They are holding the hands of strangers when the earth rumbles, anchoring one another to the ground with the simple, powerful grip of human connection. They are waiting for the end. They know it is coming. The world above them is being unmade, and when the dust finally settles, everything they knew will be gone. The homes they loved, the streets they walked, the lives they built, all of it is turning to ash in the wind. But sitting here in the dark, breathing the stale, damp air, they are discovering something profoundly beautiful. They are discovering that the true foundation of their world was never made of brick or stone or steel. It was made of this. It was made of the quiet, whispered comforts in the dark. It was made of the shared blankets, the offered water, the gentle hands reaching out to steady the trembling shoulders of a stranger. As the long, unmeasured hours drift by, the heavy exhaustion of the underground finally begins to win. The low, rushing murmur of the whispers slowly fades, replaced by the deep, rhythmic sound of thousands of people breathing in unison. The children are asleep, tucked into makeshift beds of coats and suitcases. The old men and women are resting their heads against the tiled walls, their hands folded peacefully in their laps. The young soldier sleeps beneath the old man's coat. The mother sleeps with her baby held safely to her chest. The teenage girl sleeps with the silver locket clutched tightly in her palm. The candles burn down to small, sputtering pools of wax, casting their final, dancing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The tunnels grow darker, softer, more completely hushed. The earth above them may still be trembling, the storm may still be raging, but down here, in the deep, protective cradle of the underground, there is only peace. They are entirely safe in this moment. They are held fast in the beautiful, enduring warmth of their shared humanity. They surrender to the heavy, velvet weight of sleep, dreaming quietly, desperately, and beautifully of the morning when the heavy iron gates will finally open, and they can walk out of the dark, together, into the light of a silent, peaceful world. The silence of the morning arrived not as an empty space, but as a long, deep breath that the earth had been waiting for years to exhale. It is a morning unlike any other in the history of the world. For more than 1,000 days, the horizon has been defined by the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of the great guns, a sound that became the very heartbeat of the landscape. But today, as the pale gray of the night begins to soften into the delicate gold of a new dawn, that heartbeat has stopped. The air is perfectly, stunningly still. The dust of the ruins, which has hung in the air like a permanent, gray shroud, has finally begun to settle, drifting down to coat the shattered stones in a fine, quiet powder. If you were to stand in the center of the broken city, or at the edge of the vast, greening steppes, you would hear a sound that feels almost like a miracle. It is a small, clear, and incredibly fragile sound. A single bird, perhaps a sparrow nesting in the eaves of a roofless house, or a lark rising from the tall grass of a former battlefield, is singing. Its melody is simple and bright, a tiny ribbon of silver thread winding through the immense quiet. It is the first news of the peace, carried on the wings of something that never knew there was a war at all. In the shallow trenches, in the earthen dugouts, and in the ruins of the grand apartment blocks, the men are waking up. They do not wake to the sharp, sudden bark of a command or the terrifying whistle of a falling shell. They wake slowly, as if emerging from a deep, underwater dream. They open their eyes and look up at the sky, which is a pale, untroubled blue, clear of the dark smears of smoke that have stained it for so long. A young soldier, his uniform frayed and heavy with the weight of 100 marches, sits up on his rough woolen blanket. He reaches out a hand, his fingers trembling just a little, and touches the earth beside him. It is warm from the rising sun. He realizes, with a sudden, overwhelming clarity, that he does not need to check his rifle. He does not need to look toward the horizon with narrowed, fearful eyes. He can simply sit here. He can feel the sun on his face. He can listen to the bird. He reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out a small, tattered bundle of letters, tied together with a piece of dirty string. He has read them so many times that he knows the shape of every letter, the curve of every word. But today, as he looks at the handwriting of his mother, his wife, his sister, the words feel different. They are no longer a tether to a world he might never see again. They are a map of the world he is finally allowed to return to. He closes his eyes and imagines the long walk home. He imagines the wooden gate of his garden, the smell of the linden trees in the village square, the sound of a kettle whistling on the stove. For the first time, these things do not feel like ghosts. They feel like promises. There is no shouting of joy in this first dawn. There are no grand, booming celebrations. The relief is too heavy for that, too profound to be carried by a cheer. It is a quiet, tearful relief that sits in the chest like a weight. You can see it in the way the men look at one another. They share long, silent gazes, their eyes filling with a sudden, hot moisture that they do not try to wipe away. It is an acknowledgement of survival, a shared wonder at the fact that they are still here, that their hearts are still beating in the quiet of the morning. Across the broken street, in the shadow of a leaning stone wall, another man is sitting. He wears a different uniform, a coat of a different color, but he is doing exactly the same thing. He is holding a photograph of a child he hasn't seen in years, a child who will have forgotten his face by now. He is looking at the ruins of the city he was sent to take, and then he looks at the sky. The soldier with the letters stands up. He walks slowly across the debris, his boots crunching on the broken glass. He reaches the other man. No words are spoken between them. There is no need for the languages of empires anymore. The soldier reaches into his pack and pulls out a small, dry piece of bread, the last of his rations. He breaks it in half and offers one piece to the man in the different coat. The second man takes the bread with a slow, grateful nod. They sit together in the ruins, two tired boys at the end of a long, dark road, sharing a final meal in the first light of the peace. It is a microscopic act of everyday heroism, a beautiful, stubborn refusal to let the hatred of the past survive into the morning. They are not enemies anymore. They are just survivors, anchored to the earth by their shared exhaustion and their shared hope. In the basements and the cellars, the civilians are beginning to emerge. They climb the stairs with hesitant, blinking eyes, shielding their faces from the brightness of the sun. They look at their city, and they see the tragedy of what has been lost, the grand libraries, the family homes, the parks where they used to walk on Sunday afternoons. But they also see the light. An old woman, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders, walks to a patch of earth between two fallen pillars. There, pushing up through the gray ash and the shattered brick, is a single, wild dandelion. It is a bright, defiant splash of yellow against the monochrome ruins. The woman kneels down, her joints popping in the quiet, and gently touches the soft petals. She does not pick it. She simply cups her hands around it, protecting it from the breeze, and she begins to weep. She weeps for the children who are not here to see it. She weeps for the husband whose chair at the table will always be empty. She weeps for the beauty that refuses to die, even when the world is broken. This first day is a day of deep, sacred mourning. The silence of the guns has made room for the voices of the lost. In every heart, there is a quiet roll call of names, the brothers, the fathers, the friends who are resting forever in the deep woods, under the tall grass of the steppes, or beneath the frozen ice of the rivers. Their presence is felt in the stillness, a gentle, haunting company that walks beside the living in the new light. The peace is not an erasure of the sorrow, it is a quiet sanctuary where that sorrow can finally be held, respected, and laid to rest. As the sun climbs higher, the warmth begins to fill the streets and the fields. The air grows sweet with the scent of damp earth and the first blossoms of May. The heavy, metallic smell of the war is being washed away by a gentle, spring rain that begins to fall from the pale clouds. It is a soft, rhythmic drumming on the stones, a cleansing sound that feels like the earth itself is being washed clean. People begin to move through the city with a new, tentative grace. They are not running anymore. They are not hiding. They are walking. They are looking into the faces of the people they pass, offering small, shy smiles, sharing the incredible, miraculous secret of their survival. They are helping one another clear the debris from a doorway, sharing a cup of warm water, leaning on one another as they navigate the broken streets. It is a fragile, beautiful rebuilding of the world, one small kindness at a time. A group of soldiers has found an old, battered gramophone in the ruins of a music shop. The horn is dented, and the wood is scratched, but they find a single, unbroken record. They wind the handle with careful, reverent hands and set the needle down. A soft, crackling melody begins to play. It is a slow waltz, a song from a time before the world turned dark. The music drifts out into the street, weaving through the ruins, floating up toward the open sky. A few couples begin to dance, their heavy boots moving clumsily but gently on the uneven pavement. They hold each other closely, their heads resting on each other's shoulders, letting the music carry them away from the memories of the fire and the frost. It is a quiet, defiant dance of life, a beautiful assertion that the heart can still find its rhythm, even after the longest of winters. The first day of peace is not a day of grand answers. The road ahead is long, and the scars on the land and the soul will take many lifetimes to heal. There will be much work to do, many houses to rebuild, many empty places to fill. But as the evening begins to settle over the world, pulling a veil of soft, bruised violet across the sky, there is a profound sense of arrival. The long, terrifying journey is over. The shadows have finally stopped falling backward. The soldiers lie down to sleep, but tonight they do not sleep with their boots on. They do not sleep with their hands on their weapons. They pull their blankets up to their chins and listen to the wind sighing through the trees. It is a gentle, soothing sound, a lullaby of the earth that carries no threats, only the ancient, rhythmic breathing of a world at rest. The moon rises large and luminous over the quiet ruins, washing the landscape in a soft, silver light. The stars stand watch in the boundless sky, shining with a calm, eternal grace. The birds have tucked their heads beneath their wings, sleeping in the hidden corners of the broken city. Everything is still. Everything is quiet. The first dawn without guns has faded into the first night of peace. The people are resting, held safe in the deep, protective embrace of the earth they have defended, the earth they have survived. They are dreaming of the morning, a morning where they can wake up and simply decide where to walk. A morning where the only thunder will be the summer storms, and the only silence will be the peace of a long, undisturbed sleep. The war is a memory now, a dark story told late at night to make the light of the morning feel more precious. The world is turning, slow and steady, moving away from the darkness and toward the sun. And in the quiet, breathing dark, the heart finds its rest, finding a fragile, hopeful, and endlessly beautiful peace in the simple fact of a new day. Good night to the weary. Good night to the brave. The dawn is coming, and it will be a morning of birdsong and light, forever and ever, in the quiet, peaceful world.